Äthiopien, Haiti. Und lassen Sie mich den Bericht in Erinnerung rufen, den Michelle Bachelet, die ehemalige Menschenrechtskommissarin, präsentiert hat hinsichtlich dem Schicksal der Uiguren in Xinjiang. Angesichts der Kriegsverbrechen, der Verbrechen gegen die Menschlichkeit, des Verbrechens der Aggression, angesichts dieser Verbrechen werden wir das erste Podium heute Nachmittag auch dem Thema Accountability, Rechenschaftspflicht, widmen.
Sector bancario chino. Ayer su empresa china Renaissance Holdings dijo que había perdido el contacto con el banquero. Hoy las acciones de la empresa se han desplomado un 50%. Bloomberg asegura que el banquero no se ha puesto en contacto con la empresa en los últimos 2 días y, según sus fuentes, la familia del ejecutivo ha dicho que está asistiendo una investigación. Lo curioso es que el expresidente de ese mismo banco también estuvo involucrado en otra investigación desde septiembre, pero se desconoce el asunto de ese caso. Son muchas de las ocasiones ocasiones en las que hablamos del peligro de invasión de minoristas en el mercado, en los mercados financieros, pero ahora los expertos están alertando de una posible catástrofe bursátil por la popularidad que están obteniendo una apuesta, sobre todo en el mercado de opciones, que es muy arriesgada. De hecho, algunos expertos lo comparan con coger una moneda enfrente de una apisonadora. Hablamos de las opciones que expiran en menos de 24 horas, algo que no suele ser habitual. Esas opciones se llaman 0DTES y los inversores las utilizan para hacer apuestas sobre acontecimientos que mueven el mercado, como la publicación de datos económicos o discursos de la Fed. En Wall Street hay cada vez más preocupación por la popularidad que han ganado estas opciones. Creen que podría ser la causa del aumento de volatilidad y también de los enormes vaivenes de precios que tenemos en un mismo día. Para que se hagan una idea del boom que han tenido estas opciones, han pasado de representar el 22,5% del volumen de negocio diario de opciones del S&P 500, eso en el primer trimestre de 2022, a suponer ahora el 44% de ese volumen de negociación día a día en el cuarto trimestre, según datos de la CBOE. De hecho, uno de los estrategas más importantes de JP Morgan, Marco Kolanovic, advirtió de que la popularidad de esas opciones podría provocar lo que calificó como un volmagedón, una especie de armagedón, pero de volatilidad. Dice que su principal miedo es que se repita lo que se vio en febrero de 2018, cuando un despunte en la volatilidad causó un crash en las estrategias que habían apostado a que la volatilidad iba a caer. Algunos expertos creen que ese evento borró 2.000 millones de dólares del mercado. Ya tenemos la comparecencia del presidente de la conferencia de Múnich. Vamos allá con ello.
From the Secretary General of the OSCE and the Chairman in Office of the OSCE, one of the last organizations where Russia is still participating. We will highlight in this conference again, or we will take a holistic approach to security. We will look at climate and security, and the biggest sin that Vladimir Putin commits is that he is right now in a situation, we are in a situation, we have to find billions of dollars to support Ukraine, to buy weapons, to defend democracy, the rule of law, money that would be much better spent on the fund for loss and damage, for helping all partners to work to fight the effects of climate change. This is the most important threat that we face, and I would like to all of you to look at the speech that George Soros gave yesterday in front of 1,600 young Munich students at the Munich University. We will highlight this conference the role of women. We are happy, I'm happy to announce that we are in the podiums, as I promised last year, that we'll have 50% women sitting on our podiums during this conference. As Munich Security Conference, we are launching a women's parliamentarian program, and we continue, and I would like to welcome a new generation, so to speak, of Munich young leaders. Let me end where the MSC, the Munich Security Conference, 60 years ago started. It started as a transatlantic conference. Ewald von Kleist, 60 years ago, had with him, and these pictures were not nice, seen from today's perspective, in a smoke-filled room, 80 men, basically 80 men who enjoyed it. And I don't know if Jim Jones is here, one of the long-time former national security advisor, who told me that the Americans love to come here because they could discuss, but also then celebrate Munich Fasching. We have the largest ever Congress delegation in history. We expect the US Vice President, who I've seen, Minister President Söder, you welcomed the Vice President, and we have many members of the Biden administration. I would would ask you to warmly welcome our friends from the United States, and I would like also to add Canada, who have been fantastic friends over the year to the Munich Security Conference. Thank you for coming. We Europeans know how much we owe you. At the same time, we Europeans also know that we have to do more. And in this context, I would like to welcome the new German Defense Minister, Boris Pistorius. You have a tall task in front of you. Finally, I would like, and he will be surprised, I would like to honor one particular person, my former boss, Javier Solana. Javier Solana is a Spanish socialist, Minister of Culture and Foreign Affairs of his country, Spain, NATO Secretary General, first EU High Representative for whom I had the pleasure to work. At 80 years, Javier, you can proudly look back on your life, a life dedicated to democracy, freedom, and the defense of humanity. Javier. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank our partners, the mayor of all of our partners. I want to thank the mayor of Munich, Dieter Reiter. I want to thank the Minister President of Bavaria, Markus Söder. Thank you very much for all you have done for the Munich Security Conference over years. I would also like your cabinet members. We feel very much welcome in Munich, and we will, of course, stay here. We'll stay in the Hotel Bayerischer Hof. I must admit, we were not successful to have it grow in size. So I lost a few friends over time who we were not able to accommodate. I would like also to thank the Bayerischer Rundfunk as host broadcaster. Last but not least, I would like to thank the people of Munich and thank them for their support and their tolerance. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now ask for your attention. Please listen to Samson Tsoy, a British pianist of Russian and Korean origin. He will play for us Schubert's Impromptu No. 2. His music is played to honor and to remember the victims of violence and natural catastrophes. Samson.
Bueno, pues ahí pueden ver, han podido ver al presidente de la conferencia de Múnich diciendo que ahora mismo, pues van a reproducir una pieza de música, lo están viendo con piano, para hacer un homenaje a las víctimas de catástrofes naturales y de violencia, ha dicho el presidente entre lágrimas. Por cierto, vamos a recuperar algunas noticias de esta jornada antes de regresar a esa conferencia de Múnich, porque, como les decíamos, enseguida, menos cuarto, era cuando estaba programado que empezara la comparecencia de un oficial ucraniano. No nos han dicho de quién se trata, entendemos que se trata de, una persona dentro del gobierno de Ucrania, aunque no sabemos si se trata de un ministro o estamos hablando incluso del propio Zelensky. Vamos a ver, porque de momento no se ha hecho mención a quién va a ser la persona que esté ahí, de la parte del gobierno ucraniano. Bueno, hoy el tema del día, y vuelve a ser de nuevo, pues ese reconocimiento que ha tenido la propia OTAN de su talón de Aquiles, que es que va con mucho retraso en la carrera armamentística. Jens Stoltenberg ha reconocido que Ucrania consume munición a un ritmo más rápido del que la OTAN puede fabricarla. Y ahora un país de la alianza, Estonia, ha calculado cuánto deberían invertir los países de la Unión Europea para dar toda la munición que le pide Ucrania. Agárrense a la silla con este dato que les vamos a dar, que es lo que le costaría a la Unión Europea toda la munición que necesita Ucrania, 4.000 millones de euros. Y fíjense en este siguiente dato, Rusia está usando la misma cantidad de munición en un día de la que puede fabricar Europa en un mes. Dicho de otra manera, lo que Europa produce en un mes, Rusia lo consume en un día. Por eso, hoy Estonia, país que insiste vigorosamente en ayudar a Ucrania por el miedo a que la guerra le salpique, ha mandado un documento a todos los países miembros de la Unión Europea para que sientan la urgencia de aumentar el gasto en defensa. De hecho, en ese documento Estonia les ha pedido que hagan un esfuerzo extraordinario para tomar decisiones rápidas. No sabemos si se refiere también, por ejemplo, al hecho de que puedan mandar esos cazas que está pidiendo Zelensky. En cualquier caso, desde Estonia dicen que el precio de cualquier retraso en una decisión importante es muy alto y que está subiendo cada día. Muchos expertos creen que la era posguerra fría ha acabado y hemos vuelto a las carreras armamentísticas típicas de los momentos preguerras mundiales. El ejemplo más claro es el de Polonia, vecino de Ucrania, que en cuanto Rusia invadió su país, ha visto el país colindante, el gobierno ha decidido aprobar una ley para más que duplicar el tamaño de su ejército y también se ha ido de compras de armas. Por ejemplo, Polonia se ha hecho con 500 sistemas de lanzamiento de misiles de largo alcance y 20 de ellos han ayudado a Ucrania a infligir un daño importante en el ejército ruso. François Heisbourg, un veterano analista de defensa francés y el exasesor del gobierno, ha dicho en declaraciones a Bloomberg que desde el 24 de febrero de 2023 esto es la historia del fin de la era posguerra fría. Dice que está claro que ningún ejército, ni siquiera el de Estados Unidos, tendría inventario militar suficiente como para entrar en una guerra larga y de alta intensidad. El asunto del globo espía podría incluso provocar una conversación entre Joe Biden y Xi Jinping. Así lo sugirió ayer el propio presidente de Estados Unidos. Dijo que esperaba hablar con el presidente chino y llegar al fondo de este asunto. Eso sí, Biden dijo que no iba a pedir disculpas por abatir ese globo, pero los chinos dicen que de esa presunta reunión no saben nada. El portavoz de Exteriores ha dicho que no tienen ninguna información sobre una posible conversación entre los dos líderes y que Estados Unidos no puede buscar comunicación cuando, por otra parte, sigue escalando la confrontación. Rusia va a actuar si Europa decide confiscar sus activos para reconstruir Ucrania. Así lo ha dicho el Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores. Asegura que Rusia está lista ya para tomar medidas compensatorias equivalentes si la Unión Europea confisca sus activos en el extranjero. María Zakharova ha advertido de que no se olvidan de que hay activos extranjeros de los países occidentales dentro del territorio ruso. La portavoz del Ministerio de Exteriores ha recordado que los países de la Unión Europea tradicionalmente han sido importantes inversores en la economía rusa y que esos activos extranjeros en Rusia superan significativamente el volumen de los recursos rusos congelados en el extranjero. Bueno, ha arrancado ya la comparecencia y la conferencia de la seguridad en Múnich, donde se reúnen los líderes occidentales para hablar en palabras llanas de la guerra y de los problemas que enfrentan ahora, como la falta de munición y el problema de la producción de armas y de munición también. Y este mediodía, por ejemplo, hemos escuchado a Stoltenberg, también justo ahora al presidente de la conferencia, que sigue hablando, por cierto, pero ahora se espera que enseguida a las 2:15 hable Olaf Scholz y Emmanuel Macron, dos pilares fundamentales en Europa para Ucrania. Vamos a estar muy pendientes y retransmitiremos esas comparecencias en cuanto comiencen. Antes se espera que hable un oficial ucraniano del gobierno. Bueno, todavía no sabemos la identidad de ese oficial. Vamos a ver, porque enseguida comienza esa comparecencia. Enseguida, en cuanto acabe la del presidente de la Conferencia de Seguridad. Bueno, por cierto, allí en Múnich ha hablado Georgieva, la directora gerente del Fondo Monetario Internacional. Ha hablado sobre la desglobalización e insiste en que los países que más van a perder con esa desglobalización que ya ha comenzado, dice, son los desarrollados. Es decir, una advertencia clara a Occidente, Estados Unidos, Europa. Bueno, enseguida vamos a escuchar todo esto a partir cuando empiece ya el informativo. Pero tenemos en directo a Zelenski, finalmente es él, el oficial ucraniano que está hablando en la conferencia de Múnich. Conectamos con ello.
There is everyone who left that there is no alternative but to defeat Goliath, who came to destroy our life. Being David is fighting, and we are fighting. Being David is having a sling to win. We do not have yet the David's sling from Israel, but I believe it is just temporarily. Now I would like to thank for the powerful support and mighty weapons. I thank Olaf and Emmanuel who are present here on this panel, and I thank all our partners present here in Munich, the United States, Britain, all the countries of the EU, and all from the whole world. I'm grateful to everyone who gives the sling to Ukrainian David, thanks to which Russian Goliath has already started to lose his ground. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. We saw it last year, and he will definitely fall already this year. We can make it, all of us together, just as David did. We can make sure that there is no alternative to our victory, but then there should be no alternative to our determination, to the determination of all of us on Dnipro and on Spree, on Seine, on Thames, on Potomac and Vistula, on Tiber, Danube and Jordan, and everywhere, in every part of the world where freedom is valued more than the mercy of a tyrant. Last year, when I was here in Munich at the conference, I was looking for such common determination. Ukraine was clearly telling the world, we will fight for ourselves if Russia starts a full-scale war. I wanted to hear from the world, Ukraine, we will be with you. Unfortunately, I heard it only after Russian missiles struck our land, already after the Russian tanks started moving, already after Putin destroyed all alternatives, leaving just one. Who will win, he or us? In fact, you have already responded with the name of this conference's panel discussion, Goliath.
Bueno, Zelenski, muy claro en sus mensajes dirigidos a los líderes occidentales que están en esta conferencia de seguridad de Múnich. Dice que Rusia ha empezado ya a perder terreno en la guerra y además ha insistido en que Vladimir Putin va a caer ya este año. Así de claro ha sido. Ese es uno de los titulares de esta comparecencia que está teniendo Zelenski, comparecencia sorpresa, insistimos, les habíamos dicho que se trataba de un oficial ucraniano, que seguramente sería alguien de alto rango dentro del gobierno, pero no se conocía si iba a ser o no Zelenski. Bueno, pues ahí lo tenemos, ya ha dicho que hay que asegurarse de que no hay alternativa a nuestra victoria y con ello, con esa palabra nuestra, ha querido también pues hacer suya de Europa la victoria que va a tener, espera Zelenski, bueno, en esa guerra respecto a Rusia. Volvemos a conectar con Zelenski.
The Kremlin is thinking about ways to strangle Moldova, while we are trying to convince that Ukraine needs modern combat aircraft. The Kremlin has already convinced the Iranian regime. The result is not only lethal Iranian drones in Ukrainian skies, but also something with which the Kremlin paid for it. Are you sure it's just money? Or maybe the world will face the enriched Iranian regime? And to what extent? 90%, 92% or 100%? And I'm sure none of us wants to let the region of Middle East and the Gulf to taste it, while we spend weeks to agree on new sanctions against Russia. The terrorist state is looking for ways to adapt to the restrictions already in place through parallel imports, shadow fleet of tankers and the like. Where shall we see the impact of this illegal profit of Russia? In the efforts to corrupt your political systems and international institutions, in attempts to destabilize your social life, and in disinformation campaigns against your people, in escalation in those regions that are sensitive to you. What awaits, for example, Libya, Mali, or Central African Republic while Moscow had the power? What awaits Syria? Nothing good, just like many other nations. So you will have no rest as well. So it's not just about Ukraine. The point is that Goliath must lose. And there is no alternative to this, because the Kremlin can break the security and peace of all who are now represented here in Munich. Delayed decisions of the world are a resource Putin's dictatorship lives on. It's been that way for years. The longer the talks about the enlargement of the European Union dragged on, the more destructiveness the Kremlin brought to the then gray zone between the European Union and Russia. The louder it was said that it was necessary to wait before Ukraine was allowed to enter NATO's open door, the more aggressive Russian policy became. The longer the silence on Crimea, on the global agenda lasted, the more vigorous Russian revanchism became. And the more the world argued over what sanctions and when to impose against Russia, the more shameless the Kremlin's ambitions became. The longer we in Ukraine, in Europe, in the world had no unity, the more illusions Russia had. Now all this is being corrected. Just like last year, I now propose to act immediately. But unlike last year, now I have the most convincing argument, our achievements. Can we detour Russian strikes? Yes. Can we protect our cities from Russian missiles? Definitely. Can we liberate our land? There are 1,891 proofs of this. That is exactly how many cities, towns, villages we managed to liberate from the Russian occupation. Can we restore security in the Black Sea region and food security in the world? The Black Sea Grain Initiative and the humanitarian initiative Grain from Ukraine are convincing. Is it time for Ukraine to be a full-fledged part of the European Union? Most Europeans support membership for Ukraine. We have already gained the status of a candidate country. We are already preparing to start membership negotiations. We are already united with the European economy, logistics, and energy. There is no alternative to Ukrainian victory. There is no alternative to Ukraine in the EU. There is no alternative to Ukraine in NATO. There is no alternative to our unity. Hence, there is no and should not be any alternative to completely get rid of Russian aggression, to liberate the land, to liberate people, because every city, town, and village that remains under occupation means people staying in captivity. May people be the subject of compromise? No. We have to liberate Ukraine and Europe, because when the Russian weapon shoot at us, It is already pointed at our neighbors. May Europe be the subject of compromise? No. We have to liberate from Russia's aggressive potential every international institution and every sphere of the world economy, because only then there will be a chance for freedom to pass through our border further to the east. May freedom be the subject of compromise? No, and it's a rock solid no. I'm confident that we can gain victory not only over Putin, but also over Putins. Not only over Putins in Russia, but all around the world. Wouldn't this be a proof of the power of the idea of freedom? It will definitely be. Ladies and gentlemen, determination is never abstract. David defeated Goliath not by the power of conversation, but by the power of these actions, by the courage and sling. Courage is what we have. There is enough of it, not only in Ukraine, but in our entire coalition of victory. The sling should get stronger right now, so that the next year we would gather here in Munich for the first security post-war conference under the condition of free Ukraine, free Europe, free world. Olaf, Emmanuel, all our friends, and I. Olaf, Emmanuel, yeah, all our friends. I think you've got me right. I thank you.
Bueno, pues ahí pueden ver a Zelensky, que sigue hablando. Por sorpresa, les decíamos, iba a ser un oficial ucraniano, probablemente alguien de alto rango. Ha sido Zelensky y está siendo muy claro respecto a las posibilidades que le ve al fin de esta guerra. Dice que no hay otra alternativa a la victoria ucraniana, pero tampoco al hecho de que Ucrania va a entrar en la Unión Europea, y no solo eso, que por cierto ya está un poco gestionándose, sino que dice también que Ucrania va a entrar también en la OTAN, en la Alianza Atlántica, algo que no quiere Rusia y que, bueno, pues ya desde el principio de la guerra supimos que era una de las grandes líneas rojas de Putin. Bueno, muy interesante también lo que ha dicho Zelensky respecto a esa queja que parecíamos interpretar de sus palabras de lo que están tardando los líderes europeos en volver a aplicar paquetes de sanciones contra Rusia. Me da la sensación de que ya ha terminado Zelensky, así que bueno, nosotros vamos a seguir haciendo un repaso de cuáles han sido las principales frases o titulares que nos ha dejado el presidente de Ucrania. También, por ejemplo, ha dicho, bueno, pues que vamos a ganar no solo a Putin, sino a todos los Putins del mundo. Cuando estamos hablando, bueno, él se refiere sobre todo a esos regímenes autoritarios del resto del mundo. Por ejemplo, también ha citado el régimen de Irán. Dice que hay entre un 90 y un 100% de probabilidades de que la guerra acabe también salpicando a Irán, al régimen de Irán, y dice que nadie quiere que la guerra llegue a Oriente Medio cuando nos pasamos semanas decidiendo pues qué sanciones hay que aplicarles a los rusos. Bueno, me parece que están teniendo una conversación el presidente de la conferencia y también Zelensky, así que conectamos de nuevo con esa señal en directo.
Do you share his view? And he's going to respond in Ukrainian.
Питання. Ви знаєте, я в принципі не поділяю точки зору президента Путіна.
President Putin, I don't share anything with him. I do realize all the risks. I understand that they are there, great risks, and really he's interested in making sure that support is hindered or getting slow. Not talking about weapons, we're talking about all aspects of support, including financial support and political support. On all floors, on all platforms, including the UN and all the other various platforms, political support in Africa, for example, and the vision of what he's looking at of unity. So he does this last thing he wants is for the world to be united vis-a-vis Ukraine, and he has been working hard and drug the wedge between individual members of the European Union, indeed. So they don't want us to to be resilient enough, as opposed to what we have demonstrated for the last year. And of course, fatigue, there is such thing as fatigue. There's a variety of issues and challenges, including energy, climate, whatever, inflation. And he's trying to pull them all together, lump them on the world, lump them together with the sanction policy to make them feel tired. But a lot of things happened because he started the war in the first place. So we don't have to be tired. We need to keep repeating to society and to each other, and which is the right thing to do, to keep in mind who actually started the war, why the war was started. And it's obvious that Ukraine is not going to be his last stop. He's going to continue his movement all the way, I don't know, just including all other states that at some point in time were part of what? Of the Soviet bloc. So, and it's easy to understand what he's driving at. I said speed is crucial. Exactly. Let me. And he wants the world to slow down, because speed determines our prospects to overcome, to prevail. So he is afraid of his own domestic situation. He is losing himself to his own people, as a matter of fact. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, we have seen that Russia is trying for some days already to start on kind of offensive. My question, how do you think this...
Bueno, pues sigue hablando Zelenski. Ahí pueden ver la contundencia del mensaje del presidente de Ucrania, diciendo que Putin va a caer este año y que no hay alternativa a su victoria. Bueno, esta comparecencia de Zelenski pueden seguir, continuar siguiéndola en nuestro canal de YouTube, en un directo en paralelo que estamos haciendo, además de este directo de la señal de Negocios Televisión, pero empezamos ya el informativo. La OTAN ya reconoce su talón de Aquiles, va con mucho retraso en la carrera armamentística. Jens Stoltenberg ha reconocido que Ucrania consume munición a un ritmo más rápido del que la OTAN puede fabricarla. Y ahora un país de la OTAN, Estonia, ha calculado cuánto deberían invertir los países de la Unión Europea para dar toda la munición que le pide a Ucrania. Y agárrense a la silla, 4.000 millones de euros. Y fíjense también en este dato, Rusia está usando la misma cantidad de munición en un día de la que puede fabricar Europa en un mes. Dicho de otra manera, lo que Europa produce en un mes, Rusia lo utiliza en un día. Enseguida se lo contamos. Por cierto, ya ha arrancado esa conferencia de seguridad de Múnich, donde se reúnen los líderes de Occidente para hablar en palabras llanas de la guerra y de los problemas que enfrentan ahora, como la falta de munición y el problema de la producción de armas. Y bueno, acaban de escuchar a Zelenski hablando por sorpresa en esa conferencia. No es lo que estaba programado. De hecho, se hablaba de que iba a asistir un oficial ucraniano, pero no se decía quién. Había mucho misterio, especulaba que podía ser Zelenski, también otro miembro de alto rango del gobierno. Finalmente ha sido el presidente de Ucrania quien ha insistido en que no hay alternativa a la victoria de Ucrania, al acceso de Ucrania en la Unión Europea y también a su entrada en la OTAN. Y ha dicho que Putin va a caer este mismo año. JP Morgan asegura que es improbable que el Brent supere los $100 el barril este año, a no ser que se produzcan factores geopolíticos significativos. JP Morgan añade que existe la posibilidad de que la OPEP añada más oferta y que los flujos rusos se recuperen a mediados de 2023. Dice el banco que es improbable, que la OPEP tenga que salir a defender el petróleo para que no baje de los $80, por lo que no le haría falta volver a recortar la producción de petróleo. Muy buenas tardes, pues ya hemos tenido esa comparecencia de Zelenski diciendo tajantemente que Putin va a caer este mismo año y diciendo que no hay alternativa, que efectivamente lo que va a hacer Ucrania es entrar en la Unión Europea, entrar en la OTAN y ganar la guerra. Bueno, ha sido muy claro, desde luego, Zelenski. Claro también respecto a los líderes europeos, diciéndoles un mensaje muy claro, de que no puede ser que estén tardando tanto en aplicar esas sanciones, en lanzar un nuevo paquete de sanciones contra Rusia. Van 10, pero es que llevamos un año de guerra, por lo tanto, pues es prácticamente a paquete por mes y medio, casi. Ahí va la queja de Zelenski para los líderes europeos y por su lentitud a la hora de castigar a Rusia. Bueno, Zelensky, como decimos, ha sido muy claro y ha dicho que hay que ganar esta guerra, pero la OTAN ha reconocido su talón de Aquiles, sobre todo en esta última semana. El talón, básicamente, es que va con mucho retraso en la carrera armamentística. Jens Stoltenberg reconoció que Ucrania consume munición a un ritmo más rápido del que la OTAN puede fabricarla. Y ahora un país de la OTAN, también por cierto Estonia, ha calculado cuánto deberían invertir los
against Ukraine. We have some analytical data that show an 80% support of, not going against Ukraine. And this is going to be a large mistake. Had Lukashenko been doing this, so it would have been really a huge history-making mistake, because at some point in time, Russia has been using their airports, airfields, to shell and bombard Ukraine. Maybe this has been done without Minsk's support. But if they do it voluntarily, if they actually join in forces, then this will be much worse for them. They will immediately become a part of Putin's aggressive equation, right? And they will be subject to future tribunals. They will have to face the need to fund restoration activities in Ukraine. So there's going to be a major mistake, and hopefully Belarus will fall short of doing that, and they do not have enough forces for that, not resources. And if they do attack us, so chances are that their soldiers will fall and will remain in our soil without being able to return. So we are defending ourselves, and they're thinking of attacking us.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My last question is about the future of your own country. You have demonstrated within Ukrainian society a lot of internal solidarity. My question is, will this unity, which I think is very, very important, will this continue after the war, and also on if I may say this, on the endemic corruption that we witnessed in your country before? Do you think that this endemic corruption will be pulled out by its roots for good?
All right. There's no such thing as in-depth corruption in Ukraine. A lot of things, of course, have been put bare, but have come up to surface with this war, against the backdrop of this war. I agree with what you're saying, and some part of our people have stayed with the occupiers. But okay, winding forward, the post-war Ukraine, I'm sure that Ukraine will be able to cope with corruption because we are conducting a series of reforms, and we have a specialist anti-corruption agency, and I'm about to appoint a new leader, and next month, in fact, so this process will be completed. So regardless of the war, we are reforming ourselves. We are fighting corruption, and but again, during the war, of course, corruption is always there, because war is sometimes used as a source of illicit incomes, as you know. But hopefully this is going to end pretty much soon, and we'll cope with corruption after that.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I think I speak for everybody when I thank you for your intervention this afternoon, and we wish you and your people good luck, and we'll do everything also here at the Munich Security Conference to really support behind your cause. You are defending our freedom as well. So thank you very much for being with us. Good luck to you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Good luck and peace. Thank you for support.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to keep on your headphones, because now it's a great pleasure and honor to welcome for the second time in a row to the Munich Security Conference, Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Sehr geehrter Herr Botschafter Heusgen, meine Damen und
Mr.
Herren.
Heusgen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm certain I speak on behalf of everyone when, after this speech of President Zelensky, I first of all respond to him. Volodymyr, we would have loved to have you with us today, because Ukraine belongs here, at our side, in a free and united Europe. However, we understand where your place has to be at this time, has to be in Kiev, working tirelessly for your country. And for that, we here in Munich wish you continued strength and confidence.
Extend a very special, very warm welcome to the Vice President of the United States. Thank you for joining the conference once again, I may add. It is an honor to have you here with us, along with so many colleagues from the US Senate, the House of Representatives, and the administration. Welcome to all of you to Munich. Ihnen, lieber Herr Ischinger, war es immer ein Anliegen, dass
Mr. Ischinger, it was always important to you to ensure that this conference was not just about giving speeches, but that the participants entered into a dialogue with each other. And Mr. Heusgen, I know that you set great store by that too. So I'd therefore like to confine myself to a few points to, as it were, kick off our discussion. First of all, Putin's revisionism will not prevail. On the contrary, Ukraine is more united than ever. The EU stands unified, and it stands behind Ukraine's future EU membership. NATO is growing. It is gaining new members. And at the same time, thousands of young Russians have paid the ultimate price for Putin's war with their lives, and many others have turned their backs on their country. The Ukrainians are defending their freedom at such high cost and with remarkably impressive resolve. And we are supporting them as comprehensively and as long as is necessary. Germany alone provided more than 12 billion euro to assist Ukraine last year. We've taken in more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees, granting them full access to our labor market, to our schools, to our universities. We're supplying state-of-the-art weaponry, ammunition, and other military goods, more than any other country in continental Europe. That not only meets the, and it has to be said, justified expectations of our partners and allies, We're also assuming the responsibility which a country of Germany's size, location, and economic clout has to shoulder in times such as these. In so doing, we have broken with decades-long principles of German policy. For example, the maxim that we don't supply weapons in a war such as this and in an area such as this. I understand if some people here in Germany are concerned and question our decisions, and I want to say to them that it's not our arms supplies which are prolonging the war. The opposite is true. And that brings me to my second point. The sooner President Putin realizes that he cannot achieve his imperialist objective, the greater the chance that the war will end soon with the withdrawal of Russia's occupying forces. That's also Ukraine's aim, as President Zelenski emphasized at our meetings last week in Paris and Brussels, and he's just reaffirmed it once more just now. We, Europe, as well as the transatlantic and international communities, are firmly united in pursuit of this goal. By the way, this includes documenting and prosecuting war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by Russians in Ukraine. It's good that the Munich Security Conference is addressing this issue, for there can be no lasting peace without justice. At the same time, we're making sure that war doesn't break out between NATO and Russia. My third message is therefore, we will continue to strike a balance between providing the best possible support for Ukraine and avoiding an unintended escalation. And I'm pleased and grateful that President Biden and many other allies share this view. After all, the path we've embarked upon together runs through uncharted territory. For the first time in our history, a nuclear power is waging an imperialist war of aggression here on European soil, and there's no blueprint for that, for what we need to do in such a situation. I believe we would do well to carefully weigh up all the consequences of our actions and closely coordinate all key steps among the allies. For this is a war in our neighborhood, in Europe, a dangerous war. And despite all the pressure to take action, and that undoubtedly exists, in this key question, caution must take priority over hasty decisions and unity over going it alone, over solo actions. And from the outset, we have to provide our support in such a way that it can be continued for a prolonged period. To date, any decision we've made on supplying new weapon systems has been taken on that premise. In the case of howitzers and multiple launch rocket systems, in the case of air defense weapons, armored infantry fighting vehicles, Patriot missile batteries, and most recently, Western battle tanks. And we will continue to decide on that basis in future. That also means that all those who can supply battle tanks of this kind should now actually do so. Defense Minister Pistorius, Foreign Minister Baerbock, and myself are canvassing intensively for this. And we will do so again here in Munich. Germany will do everything it can to make this decision easier for our partners, for instance, by training Ukrainian soldiers here in Germany or providing support in terms of supplies and logistics. By the way, I see this as an example of the kind of leadership which everyone is entitled to expect from Germany, and I expressly offer it to our friends and partners. And that brings me to my fourth message. Germany is committed to living up to its responsibility for Europe's security and that of NATO allied territory without any ifs or buts. In previous years, it has often been said from this platform that Germany has to live up to its responsibility in the security policy sphere. And I share this view. I not only share it, we will indeed fulfill our responsibility by providing an additional brigade to protect Lithuania, by assisting Poland and Slovakia with air defense and air policing, by protecting critical infrastructure in the North and Baltic Seas, and by leading NATO's very high readiness joint task force and keeping 17,000 troops on standby to that end. In order to accomplish that and more in the future, we are putting an end to the neglect of the Bundeswehr. We've laid the foundation for this by creating the special fund of 100 billion euro for our armed forces. To realize this, we amended the basic law with the support of our country's largest opposition party. This fund allows us to finally change gear in terms of building up our Bundeswehr's capabilities. Of course, the new combat aircraft, helicopters, ships and tanks will result in an increase in expenditure on ammunition, equipment, maintenance, exercises, training and personnel. And I therefore want to take this opportunity to reaffirm what I said in the Bundestag 3 days after the war began. Germany will increase its defense expenditure to 2% of gross domestic product on a permanent basis. In order to invest this funding in a meaningful and sustainable manner, we need a high-performing, competitive arms industry in Germany and in Europe as a whole. Therefore, my fifth point is the European Union must pull together strategically when it comes to arms policy. We must all work in the same direction. We're developing the future combat air system together with France and Spain, and the main ground combat system with France. And we're also making progress in the joint development of European capabilities. One example of this is the European Sky Shield initiative proposed by Germany, which is intended to strengthen Europe's air defense within the NATO framework. These are steps towards a Europe of defense and armament, as I outlined last year at Charles University in Prague. They are also steps towards a Europe more capable of taking action in geopolitical terms, towards a Europe which is also stronger and as an ally in the transatlantic alliance. That also means doing more to resolve conflicts in our neighborhood. This is the purpose of the European proposal initiated by President Macron and myself on an agreement between Serbia and Kosovo. And I hope that Belgrade and Pristina will grasp this historic opportunity in the interest of stability in the Western Balkans and throughout Europe. Further steps must be taken to consolidate a geopolitical Europe. After all, security cannot be achieved through military strength alone in our digital, technological, and globalized world. And that's why my sixth point is, for us Europeans, and I'm ultimately talking about all open and democratic societies like our own, it's absolutely crucial that we become more resilient overall. That will not be achieved by deglobalization, not by turning our backs on the world. That would indeed be a betrayal of our own values, as well as an illusion economically. Rather, it can only be achieved by ending one-sided, risky dependencies and making our political relations broader and more robust. We Germans know what we're talking about. After all, we in Germany ended our dependency on energy during the course of the last 12 months. That required a huge effort. We will reduce such critical dependencies in other areas too, for example, with regard to strategically important raw materials or cutting-edge technologies. Incidentally, I believe this goal, too, should be included in our new national security strategy. We're already strengthening our own production capacities, for example, for semiconductors. We're already diversifying our supply chains and gaining new suppliers and markets in the Asia-Pacific region, in Africa, in Central and South America. At the same time, this is also always about granting these regions a greater political say. Indeed, it's about demanding this say. For it's also in their interest that fundamental principles of our peaceful order and of the UN Charter are not trampled underfoot. By the way, that was one of the reasons I traveled to Beijing last autumn. All countries are called upon to defend certain fundamental principles of the international order, including China. And I'm glad that President Xi made it clear on that occasion that he is firmly opposed to any threat to deploy nuclear weapons, and most certainly to their actual deployment in Russia's war against Ukraine. At the same time, and under no illusions about what we can achieve through dialogue alone, also among our democratic partners in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Europa muss aus der Vorstellung herauskommen, dass die Probleme Europas auch die Probleme der Welt sind. Aber die Probleme der Welt sind nicht Europas Probleme. This quote from the Indian foreign minister is included in this year's Munich Security Report. And he has a point. It wouldn't be Europe's problem alone if the law of the strong were to assert itself in international relations. However, to be credible as a European or North American in Jakarta, New Delhi, Pretoria, Santiago de Chile, Brasilia, Singapore, and to achieve something, it's not enough to emphasize our shared values. We have to generally address the interests and concerns of these countries as a basic prerequisite for joint action. And that's why it was so important to me to not merely have representatives of Asia, Africa, and Latin America at the negotiating table during the G7 summit last June. I really wanted to work with these regions to find solutions to the main challenges they face, growing poverty and hunger, partly as a consequence of Russia's war, as well as the impact of climate change or the COVID-19 pandemic. And that brings me to my seventh and final point. If the multipolar world of the 21st century is to have an order which is based on justice and penalizes injustices, then we need new forms of international solidarity and new ways of enabling countries to have their say. The Munich Security Conference has also recognized this, Mr. Heusken. It seeks an exchange of ideas with all countries which share our interest in a world where power is bound by rules, which is not revisionist. That's what I'm calling for, and it's what I'm working to achieve. And I'm glad that many of you are at my side. And now I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Chief International Anchor of CNN, Christiane Amanpour.
Thank you. Mr. Chancellor, this time last year, I had the privilege of sitting here with President Zelensky. The United States had told him, maybe you shouldn't leave your country because something might happen. But he came here anyway to say that our fight is your fight, as he did again. Many nations here, with the exception of the US and the UK, did not believe in the intelligence that Vladimir Putin would in fact invade. And then 3 days later it did. You heard President Zelensky just say this must be over this year. Do you share that belief that it can and must be?
I think this is really a very brutal war. It is the imperialistic approach of Russia to conquer the whole Ukraine still, or big parts of it. And he is doing this with very much furor, with a lot of brutal impact on the soil of the Ukraine. And many people suffer from that, dying men, women, children, and young and old people. And this is what we should know. So this is what we can do now facing the situation, and that is giving the best support we can. And this is why Germany enlarged constantly its capacity of support for the Ukraine. And we did so with the effect that now we can say that Germany is the biggest supplier also of weapons to Ukraine in continental Europe, and we will continue to be there.
Mm-hmm. But you in your speech said we have to be ready for the long haul. I mean, you must strategize, you must think amongst yourselves how long this could last. Do you have a target date?
I think it is wise to be prepared for a long war, and it is wise to give Putin the message that we are ready to stay all the time together with Ukraine and that we will constantly support the country. So it is not really a very good idea that in this conference or at this podium, the two of us discuss the question when exactly in which months this war will end. The really important decision we should take all together is saying that we are willing to do it as long as necessary, and that we will do our best.
Do you believe that NATO, the allies will stay united? And do you believe that your people will stay behind you and behind this effort?
Yes. First, I'm absolutely sure that Putin never expected that there would be a that united Europe and that there would be a that united world. He never thought that the transatlantic partnership would work that good, but also he never thought that there would be so much support for Ukraine from many other countries all over the globe. And he never expected that there would be a majority of people voting in the General Assembly saying that this is a war of aggression that could not be accepted. And he never expected that even in the G20 meeting, we had a very strict sentence about this war and the Russian aggression, and an absolutely clear sentence that nuclear weapons should not be used in this war. So the unity is someone he never expected, and it is our task, but also our chance that we stick to it. I'm absolutely sure that we will. And looking at the situation in my country, I see that there is a broad support for the strategy and activities of the government. Yes, there are some, and we are a democratic country, that are not that sure whether it is really a good idea to do all these sanctions and to deploy all these many weapons to Ukraine. But even the big majority of those is in the end accepting that the government has to take a responsible decision and trust us in doing what we do. And those who possibly sometimes think we should do something more really understand that it is very good that we stick together, that we never go alone, and that we just do it together with our friends and partners, and especially with the United States. And this is why I'm also sure that we will have the support of our people for the things we are having to do.
Obviously, one can't put a date on the end. However, it does depend, I suppose, on the amount of help that you send and the speed with which you send it. So in going over the length of time it took to get the Leopard tanks, and for you to say that, the sort of choreography between the UK, US, and Germany. But now you seem to be in the position of having to persuade all those other countries that were trying to get you to send the Leopards, or let their Leopards, to actually send them. Why?
Yeah. There is a question I have to ask to others, especially those who were so much urging me to act in a special way. And I will just repeat, the only strategy for being united is never doing something just for your own, and to discuss with your friends and partners, and this is what we did. And I'm really appreciating very much the strong alliance with the United States in this case. It is very good that we did a lot, and not just the last step, together. And I'm sure we will continue to be together in this very difficult case.
When will they get there? When will the tanks get there, yours and the others?
So we are working, the Minister of Defense is here. He's working very hard to make it happen, and the industry is doing the same, so that we are able to deploy the first Leopard tanks very soon, and also with trained soldiers. This is what we already started. And we are doing so also in giving training and support for all the maintenance which is necessary, and ammunition to other partners that will join. And as I learned, many are not able to deliver the most modern tanks, which we do. I hope some more will join also in this case. But in the ones they are delivering, we will give this support as well. And as you know, there is also a big number of older tanks which we will deliver. And so this is all together what we can do. It's part of our joint activity. And I'm sure that in the end, it has a concrete military effect. But the most important effect in this case is that Putin learns that it is a miscalculation if he thinks he can just stick to this course as long as necessary, and then we will stop our support. This will not happen.
Chancellor, there's also some worrying information or reality about your own and generally NATO's ammunition stockpiles. Secretary General said this week that what used to take 12 or so months to order and produce is now taking 28 months. Is that a worry? I mean, they are using a huge amount of shells, obviously, but how can you continue to prosecute this war if you're running out of ammunition and the production has not yet ramped up?
First, I discuss very often with Jens and also with Boris, the defense minister in Germany, and my foreign minister, Annalena, that we have to change the way of dealing with the industry. So in the last years, more and more, we thought that the relation between the public defense department and the industry is something very similar to a company that is buying so there is always a stock of cars, there's a permanent production, always what you need for maintenance. The way we did it in the past, in the last 20 years or so, is that we once ordered and we agreed that the production is stopping because we have already bought what we need. So we have to understand that for our security, we have to change the way of dealing this fact. We need a permanent production of the most important weapons we are using. And this is also due to maintenance questions. And this is also due to the question of munition. And so this is what we are learning. But learning it means that we are now taking action in case of our own defense capabilities, but also doing it in supporting Ukraine. So you already may have heard that though this is a weapon that has not been used and produced for, I think, 20 or 30 years, we are now producing again the munition for the Gepard flak tank, which is very essential in defending Ukraine from missiles and other things. And it is something which we are starting so that there is a constant supply. We also discuss what we can do for achieving the chance that the munition that works with the tanks that are in use in Ukraine, mostly of Eastern and Russian origin, could also be continued. And there are a lot, and I see them, of our Eastern partners who could be very good partners in creating the production in this case. Okay. So we are willing to do our best that a permanent supply is feasible.
Part of this conference is also, as it was announced, to include the global south and actually to try to change public opinion and opinion amongst the leadership. You were just in Brazil talking to President Lula. You asked for ammunition for the Gepard tank. I also interviewed him in Washington when he visited President Biden, and he said, no, not doing it. Don't believe in it. Don't believe in what you're doing. How are you going to convince the rest of the world to come on board with what you call a war for international and global values and the rule of law?
So first, I think that this is the last moment for what Putin always is calling the global West, to have a very good and much better relationship to many countries in Asia, Africa, and the South of America. I'm completely convinced that if we look from the world from the perspective of 2050, it will be a different world with many powerful nations in Africa and the South of America. And this is obviously Indonesia and India, if you look to Asia, but also our good friends we already have in Japan and in Korea, but look at Vietnam, look at Malaysia, look at the Philippines, look at Thailand. There are many countries that could be good partners for us if we are dealing with them, and this is what we should do. And this is the same with Africa. I just want to repeat that it's very good that we have a good relation with South African Republic, that we have a good discussion with Senegal as the leading country of the African Union. But I would just remember you that Nigeria will have as some people are telling us, 500 million inhabitants in the midst or near the midst of this century. And if we go to the south of America with Brazil, with Mexico, with many other countries there, they will be strong and they will not accept that a country, even a country coming up now, will give them advice. This will be definitely a multipolar world. And the task we have today is to make very sure that this multipolar world is not a world which is not accepting the rule of law in the relation between countries, that revisionism is never accepted, which is what Putin is doing, and that we have, though we do not all agree on the way of governing our countries, agree that the habeas corpus, the integrity of a person, is something that is also accepted by those countries who are not democracies, like, for instance, Germany or France or UK or United States. And this is the one thing we have to do. And this is why I invited many of them to this Elmar meeting in G7 in Germany. And this is why I think that we should not underestimate the situation. It was Brazil, it was South Africa, it was Argentina, it was Indonesia, it was India, and many others that made it feasible that we had that strong decision in G20 saying that this is an aggression and saying that nuclear bombs should not be used in this war. And we have them as partners, those who already decided on the General Assembly together with us, but also those who did not, haven't done this, but who are absolutely clear about the aggression. And just, you mentioned Brazil, Lula was and is absolutely clear, saying this is an imperialistic aggression by Russia and nothing else.
Yeah, but he also gives a little, he also says it takes two to tango, and he puts some of that blame on Zelensky. In any event, let's move on, because we're going to get some questions in a moment. But first, the tanks were like, no, 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 yes. Are the planes going to be no, 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 yes? And what are you going to talk to President Biden about when you go to Washington to meet him soon?
So we have a very good friendship, and it is not that we have public debates, but we have a lot of debates where we work on the questions on the table. And it is something that only works if we do not tell you before what we will do, and afterwards possibly also not all. So we have to do something and have to deal with some questions. And as you know, I think some questions before you asked me, you were deciding to send combat tanks, and now you have to convince others. But though you did this, you now ask me about another question which is not on the table, which is not on the agenda, where there's no need for discussing it. I think we will have to do a lot for making feasible that now a broad support for the things we already delivered for the battlefield on the ground, and which will be important. And we will continue to do more of what we already did, and to get many countries joining us.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. And apparently we don't have any time for questions. Sorry, but it's
Republic. It's wonderful to have him here. The President has been a regular guest of the Munich Security Conference. He was here as advisor to President Hollande. He was here later on as minister. He was here as president. He was here in 2020, and he was here in 2021 virtually. I'm very, very happy that you came to Munich and to tell us about your view of things. And I'm looking forward to our discussion afterwards. Monsieur le Président, c'est à toi.
Mesdames et messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, mesdames et messieurs les ministres, mesdames et messieurs les directrices, directeurs généraux d'organisations internationales, monsieur le secrétaire général, mesdames et messieurs en vos grades et qualités, parce que je ne reconnaîtrai pas tout le monde ni dans la salle ni dans les escaliers. Je sais qu'il y a aussi beaucoup de parlementaires.
Unfortunately, I cannot welcome each and every one of you here in the room. There's company representatives here, Christoph Heusgen, head of the MSC, esteemed friends. I'm very happy that we can get together here today in this spot where for the past 60 years, I believe it is now, discussions have been held that structure our world. Discussions that have led to new considerations in the transatlantic bond. Today, we heard from President Zelensky and from Federal Chancellor Scholz, my previous speakers, and now I have to say that, speaking after them, that it is very apparent that the situation is very serious. Almost a year has passed since the catastrophic war of aggression was launched by Russia in Ukraine. And even though the time for conclusions has not yet come, I think we should look ahead anyway, or maybe take stock in a certain way. Of course, in my deliberations today, I would like to focus on the war Russia is waging in Ukraine. But at the same time, we must not forget that there are other wars that are being waged in the Middle East, in the Caucasus region. There is a war going on against terrorism, questions of nuclear issues are important as well. But of course, today, Ukraine is at the heart of the matter. After 1 year, taking stock leads to a very grave result after this catastrophic conflict. And I think I want to highlight one major point today. This war, as opposed to everything we read today, is not only a war of the Europeans, it's a war that concerns the world as a whole, because there is no justification at all for this aggression. I said this a few months ago already when I spoke at the United Nations. I said that this is a neo-imperialist attitude that we see, that is expressed in this aggression towards a neighbor of which you believe you must not respect their entire territory, and that there is a law that needs to be, a right that needs to be claimed. So the assumption that neo-colonialism and neo-imperialism were legitimate in this world. And secondly, all taboos were broken through this war of aggression. Not only the Charter of the United Nations was violated, no. It was violated by a member state of the Security Council. There has been systematic destruction of critical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure. Crimes were committed against the Ukrainian population, against civilians, and a nuclear threat is in the room as well. And the work done by Mr. Grossi at the EAA is also hugely important, and I would like to value that and appreciate that here. And he's also worked great with Iran. We must not underestimate that. So this war has had devastating consequences, and Russia only is responsible for this crisis. A crisis also of food supply, for example, despite the measures that we have taken in solidarity to the benefit of the countries that require our protection the most. Those who believe that this is a European matter, well, to those I say one aggressor and only one party that was attacked. this is clear, and we must not want a stable international organization structure without stepping up for it. And my second consideration is this. It is the case that Russia's aggression has basically been crowned by 4 clear defeats. The first defeat is the defeat on the battlefield. The basic assumption of Russia was that this war was going to be quick, that Ukraine cannot resist and will fall within a few days or maybe within a few weeks at most, and that the matter was settled. The incredible bravery of the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian people, of the political leadership in Ukraine especially, and also of those friends who are here today, including the president that we've seen on screen earlier, all those that have shown this bravery thwarted this plan. The north couldn't be taken, and then we saw what happened in Kherson. You know, we all remember this, and all this is a defeat of the original military plan of Russia. The second defeat is the defeat of the colonial mentality. So the point was to create confusion, to also create spheres of influence, and to act as though there was a legitimacy for this war of aggression. But that did not work out. Even a year later, this hasn't worked out. So what this is about is to explain that Russia is a power today that creates imbalances and injustices, not only in Ukraine or in the Caucasus or in Africa with the Wagner Group. We have seen this over the past few years. We have seen how Russia proceeds. And I talked to President Putin about a year ago, and back then I believed him in a way when he told me that the Wagner Group doesn't belong to him. But now these troops, this group is now official, quote unquote, and it's been a direct military means or tool or even a diplomatic tool that Russia is employing. It's a neo-mafiosi tool that Russia is using everywhere. And it is used to create crimes and commit crimes and create injustice. And the third defeat is a defeat, let's say a defeat looking into the future, because the result is a consolidation of Ukraine and its forces and the decision by Sweden and Finland to join NATO. And I would like to tell the representatives here how much we support them, the representatives of these countries. We want more international cooperation. There is a lot of mistrust towards Russia that has taken root, and self-defense has become more important. But now in the Caucasus, how can we assume that the challenge there can be solved by Russia, by a state that is so neo-colonial in its behavior? I was reassured by the president there that this is not the path to go down. And the fourth defeat concerns me. President Putin wanted to give Russia what supposedly it wanted, which is acclaim in the world. So how could Russia be happy with just being an exporter of raw materials and not being a nation that is important in the world? How can Russia just be a medium-sized power that causes mistrust from all its neighbors? But that is now what the situation is. 2 years ago, I shared this exact view here. Nobody can change the geography of Russia. Russia will always remain a part of Europe, geographically speaking, and nobody here in this room can solve this dilemma that there is no complete and long-term peace in our continent as long as the Russian matter has not been solved in a reasonable fashion and without complacency. But we have to continue in this spirit, and we have to take this seriously. And this is what I have been underlining time and again. Once the conflict had started, we must not be naive, show unity, act vigorously, and pursue dialogue as well, wherever it is possible. But at the moment, the hour of dialogue hasn't come yet because Russia chose war. Russia chose to even intensify this war. Russia has decided to attack civilian infrastructure and to commit war crimes. For the short term, the solution is simple. Russia must not and cannot win this war, and Russia's attack must fail. We must not allow that resorting to force or violence becomes normalized, because that puts into question stability in the world. And this is why, together with our European and American partners and many others across the globe, we have, since the beginning of the conflict, created outposts of security. We have imposed sanctions, 10 packages worth of sanctions that we have imposed on Russia's. And we have provided humanitarian and financial and economic support to Ukraine, to the people of Ukraine, and we also protected civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. We provided financial means, and let me thank the Secretary General at this point for everything he's done. And every time France has pursued the path of the greatest value added for Ukraine, for example, by supporting air defense and sending artillery and also training Ukrainian armed forces. At the same time, we also made sure that the Ukrainians can be protected, but also Romania and Estonia, for example. We are helping to strengthen and bolster the defense of the eastern flank of NATO, but also we're present in the Mediterranean Sea, and we have joint maritime groups there too, and that as a matter of fact, since the first days of the conflict. Also, there was always the question whether this conflict would spread into Romanian territory. But over time and again, we have worked towards agreement, basically. And this is my conviction. We need to intensify our support further, to undertake more efforts, increase our effort in order to help the Ukrainian people so that Ukraine itself can launch a counteroffensive, in order to then, under credible circumstances, enter into a negotiation process chosen by Ukraine. We are ready to intensify our efforts. The next few months and weeks will be decisive. But at the same time, we also stand ready to sustain a longer conflict. I don't wish for that. Nobody does, of course. But together, we have to remain credible. We have to remain credible in our perseverance. And this is what France wants to highlight once again today. Unity and determination are important to provide Ukraine with the means to go back to the negotiation table in an acceptable fashion and to work on long-term peace under conditions that the Ukrainians have decided upon and identified. And in this context, I would like to call on all our European friends today. Based on the convictions that I've just shared with you, my first call on you, my first appeal to you is this: we need to invest more in defense. If we want peace, we need the means to achieve it. France, in this regard, is putting in its fair share. So in November, we passed the strategic compass, and now we are working on a new report for defense for the 24 to 2030 timeframe. We will provide a significant number of euros to support those efforts, and we have to do more as allies. But rearming ourselves also means that we need to strengthen the European defense technological and industrial base, and all the means that we have developed recently through the agenda of Versailles a year ago need to be reinforced as well. We need to continue on this path. Also, the Ukrainian armed forces need to be enabled to continue on that path too, including with industrial support from Europe. And if Ukraine is supposed to defend Europe, it needs to be armed accordingly. It needs to be interoperable with Europe, and production capacities need to be ramped up also across Europe. We need an investment program for defense, which is ambitious in all of Europe, so that we can make the best out of the European Defense Fund. We also do have to change, maybe, or think about changing our rhythm. The war industry that we have been wanting to strengthen in France since spring is something where we need more progress. We need more standardization, more simplification at the European level. And my second appeal now is this. We should also consider the nuclear aspect of this matter. There are non-verbalized questions in this war, and nuclear issues are one of those. Nuclear weapons are. Russia's attack took place in the shadow of nuclear weapons, and of course we need to protect our allies. But at the same time, this was also a wake-up call for us. We need to ask ourselves, what role do nuclear weapons play in the EU and in NATO? French deterrence has a very decided spot. Together with the UK, together we are responsible for the security of the alliance. And of course, the Americans play a key role in this regard. And so I wish that once again, we underline the nuclear features of our alliance and that we consider once again what that means. And I would like to repeat what I said in February at the École de Guerre, a dialogue with our partners on France's nuclear deterrence, and what Europe derives from that is crucial. And thirdly, I would also like to call on all of us to rethink our security doctrine. Europe should, in all questions of arms control, have its place. I'm thinking of medium-range rockets and missiles. At one of the most recent NATO meetings, I underlined, and you may recall how important those weapons are. The United States has decided to not pursue certain contracts or agreements or treaties further, and they concerned our territory, and we were not involved here. So basically, we are a geopolitical minority, and that needs to end. It is about the security of Europe that is at stake. We need to think about this. We need to provide this type of security, and we need to guarantee it together with our NATO partners, but also as Europeans. The INF treaty was discussed over the past few years, but we were not invited to that. And so there is no treaty anymore like the INF, and we have to draw conclusions from that. That would have an added value also for the European defense posture and would strengthen our capabilities in defense and reinvigorate them as well if we had a tool like the INF Treaty again that no longer exists. And that also ties in with a more general topic that Federal Chancellor Scholz just brought up, which is air defense here on the European continent. And I think it was right that President Scholz raised the issue of air defense. We, Germans, British, French, who want to join in this effort, should have a conference on air defense in Europe. We should have a conference on that, including with industry representatives, inviting all those who have solutions to offer here. But also from a strategic point of view, we need to consider this, especially from a strategic point of view. But at the same time, deterrence and effects in the depth need to be considered. This is a central question for Europe. Europe needs to have its place in a future security order. My fourth appeal to you is this. What mechanism could we have that could prevent a cycle of aggression? We need a framework of transparency, of predictability in Europe with simple principles like inviolability of borders, sovereignty of states, the stabilizing role of Europe that we should underline. So we need an architecture that is credible with arms control. And finally, we also need a framework that prevents crises, including long-term crises on the continent. Of course, we can use existing structures like the OSCE, and of course, Europe needs to be at the heart of this. I'm not thinking dogmatically here. There is the EU, yes, but I think we need to think Europe bigger, just as we've done through the European political community that has to play a special role in this regard. Some partners have decided to leave the European Union, but they're a member of the European political community. They are partners in energy and security, and they share so many topics with us. And there are other countries that want to join the European Union, and I hope they will do it. Today, they're quite far from it. I think Norway, and the UK, Moldova, Ukraine, this is a European political community that has the opportunity to prevent crises like that and to create the architecture I just outlined. I would like to reassure the President of Moldova of our support once again. She's facing so many challenges and has faced them and mastered them. So we need a space for cooperation on our continent. And NATO plays a very fundamental, a key role here. And the last few months have shown that all those who believed that the strengthening of the European pillar within NATO was a threat for NATO have understood now that this basically strengthened our alliance, because of course, this is just logical to act this way, and that with this we have shown our determination to reach strategic goals together. And now 2 more appeals to our European partners. So my 5th appeal: in addition to the current conflict, we need to pull together in the future when it comes to other conflicts that are a threat to us already now. There is a risk that we're all facing. It's the risk of something that could happen in the next weeks or months, which is more geopolitical shifts. We could potentially see new forms of conflicts in new spaces like the cyberspace or in the maritime sphere. We must not forget the vulnerability of our democracies when it comes to destabilization campaigns and disinformation campaigns. These spheres will be exploited, maybe by Russia, but also maybe by other authoritarian powers that in this context target the destabilization of us. So we have to pool our capacities and our investments and work together more strongly in this area. And now my last appeal to all Europeans, but also everyone beyond Europe, also including the United States, is this: let's prepare peace. For the short term, we need to be strong and determined, and we need to be willing to persevere. Already now, we need to prepare the conditions for peace. This is our responsibility. But this is not about making bad compromises. No, we need a credible peace, because a credible peace will be durable. But we will have to be prepared and create the conditions for this peace. And that means that we need to work with everyone, let's say in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, in the Middle East, in Latin America and Africa. We need to be in touch with our partners in those regions who maybe do not fully share our views that I just outlined. And as I said earlier in the beginning, we're often being accused of not speaking the truth, of not being quite honest. You spend so much money on Ukraine. We have faced wars for years, and you never spent any money on us. We need to listen to these concerns. We need to listen to those countries and to those regions. And together with those countries, those regions, we need to step up together and exert pressure on Russia and create a long-lasting peace. And so that means, finally, that we have to fight this narrative of double standards. I want to call on the G20 and the G7 to stand by us, to create a partnership of the South and the North in order to strengthen solidarity at the international stage, to the benefit of health, education, the fight of food scarcity, and basically creating more credibility for richer countries and countries that are currently undergoing developments, we need to help those countries. We need to show them how we defend our principles towards a durable and just peace in Ukraine. We want a more fair, a more just world. We want a world that can tackle the challenges of climate change in those countries, but also places. But responsibility is indispensable. And in all of that, we must not forget what the responses are to this new geopolitical environment. It also needs to be a military answer. It must be a response of resolve. We need to commit ourselves to a credible peace, to a strengthened and enhanced policy of solidarity. So that was quite a long speech, and I thank you for your attention, and thank you for letting me share with you my convictions today.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. On fait 2 questions. Okay. Oui. Okay. Mr. President, thank you very much for your speech. It had an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage was it was very comprehensive. The disadvantage was we don't have much time for questions, and I will not ask you questions, but I'll ask the public who didn't get to ask questions to the German Chancellor. So you have a question for two questions for the President. I take the 2 questions right after another. And the first one doesn't even need to raise his hand. François Eisbourg. Can we get a mic? Short.
Oh, très court. Monsieur le Président, est-ce que vous
Yeah, just briefly, Mr. President, do you think that there's any chance that there will be a long-lasting peace with Russia? Because you just said Russia will remain a part of Europe always. So if Russia doesn't bury its dreams to create a big empire yet again, just as it happened in France with regards to the war in Algeria, don't you think there is any chance, any shred of hope?
Anybody? No, we do it. No other question? Yes, there, over, please.
Monsieur le Président, I'm going to speak in English, but in your vision of a new global order and a durable peace, does that include reforming the Security Council to actually give political weight and voice to all these other countries?
Look, I will start with the second question. Yes, definitely. I think we have to reshape our global order. I think first, and for me, this is why this is a huge emergency. We have to rebalance our global order and make it more inclusive. And I think I'm very impressed by how much we are losing the trust of the global South. I will be very clear and tough with ourselves. Why? Because for good reasons, they felt that this world was quite unbalanced. They felt that during the COVID-19 period of time, even if we did a lot, there was a double standard approach. We committed to do more afterwards. We had a wonderful summit. IMF made a tremendous job, WHO as well, for the Global South. But we committed, but we delivered very slowly. Look at the SDRs, we did it. We pushed very much, but so many countries didn't do so, for good reasons at home, but they didn't see the money. And on top of that, now they are impacted by the consequences of this war. So they just say, when the war is on your territory, is your top priority, you are ready to spend money, you have magnitude and speediness, but it's not the same for us. And at the same time, you have an acceleration of their challenges, inequalities, demography, climate change, and direct consequences. So I think for me, the top priority is to restore more solidarity. This is why I do believe this new partnership between South and North is key. And we will organize a conference in June in Paris with all the big international organizations and countries precisely to try to help and accelerate the reform of IMF, World Bank, and so on, but as well reshape the global order and the inclusiveness of the different forums. Part of it, definitely, is the Security Council. Let's be clear. One permanent member just decided to kill the rules of what it was supposed to look for. So we have to reform it and to reshape it. As for this dream of empire and the Russian mindset, I'm convinced that this is not a justification, but an explanation. This war is the consequence of the fact that probably nobody in Europe properly digested the end of the Cold War. Neither the Europeans nor the Russians. We thought ourselves that it was the honeymoon, the end of a wall, and everything could be repaired. Access to the European Union, new democratic standards, and a new global order. You don't change the society and what people experience overnight. And even by the way, ourselves as Europeans, we approach the consequence of the situation, we probably underestimated the importance of national culture in some countries in Europe, joining the EU. We probably underestimated the in-depth crisis and this time for transition. And we didn't think properly. It was exactly what I advocated a few years ago, but probably I formulated it and I advocated too late, but I was elected in 17. But the relationship with Russia. And I think in our own approach vis-à-vis Russia, we didn't digest it. But very clearly, I think Russia didn't digest the end of an empire. And I think clearly the deep reason of this aggression is resentment post-1990 and obsession of geopolitical empire. And when you have, look at the situation, an average GDP, a declining demography, you are the biggest country of this world with a lot of borders, especially with China and some good fellows. If you want to fix your future, you need some crazy dreams. So either you have a dream of growth and innovation, the one we could hope, either you have a dream of a new Europe based on peace, innovation, education, and so on, or you resume the old dream of empire based on hegemony and aggression. This is this one. I'm very skeptical about the ability of make a big reset on the short run, and I don't see any signal on that. The question is how, let's be clear, I don't believe one second in a regime change. And when I hear a lot of people advocating for regime change, I would just ask them for which change? Who's next? Who is your leader? How to implement it? And we experienced several times during the past decade a lot of regime change in a lot of countries. It's total failure. So just you have this regime with its obsessions, its people. We want first to help Ukraine to save its territory, its people and sovereignty. And I think the question is how to twist and create an imperfect balance, allowing them to present something sustainable for Russia itself. At the end of the day, it will be something like that. It's too early to formulate it. Now, the question is how to resist, help the Ukrainians to make on the ground something which will force Russia to come back at the table at the conditions of Ukraine. But at the point of time, given the geography, we will have to negotiate. I think in the back of their mind, this regime, these people will have the same dream. The question is how to make the new normal acceptable for them and sustainable for all of us. I think we have some ways, they are quite complicated. Definitely it's not the right time to formulate them, but we have to work on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. There are some open questions, so
not soldiers. And twice as many aid workers were killed in the last decade as in the preceding decade. That's why this is an age of impunity. And the pictures that we saw from Ukraine in the preceding session give testament to that. We're going to talk for about 15 to 20 minutes as a group here, and then engage the audience, many of whom have signaled to me that they're keen to speak, and I will do my best to bring you all in. I'm going to start with the Chief Prosecutor of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Sir, I'm going to ask you to start by summing up the state of accountability for serious crimes today. If you commit a serious crime, are you going to get away with it, or is someone going to come and get you?
Well, firstly, thank you, Ambassador Huxon, for the invitation. And it's a great question. We're living in a very imperfect world. But one thing I think is clear, that in towns and villages around the world, there is increasingly the expectation that the worst types of crimes, genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, terrible breaches of human rights, will not go unpunished, whether that's locally or internationally. So I think there's been massive developments that we've seen since the 1990s with the indictment and prosecution of Milosevic and Karadzic and Mladic, Charles Taylor, Hissan Habre, the list goes on. So I think we've made real progress, but we've got work to do.
And when you say we've got work to do, what are the big reforms necessary?
Well, I think partnerships is key. Sometimes decision makers would like to identify, for obvious reasons, a silver bullet that can solve all the maladies of the world, or even the maladies that come before criminal courts. And I think what the lesson shows is there can't be spectators, there can't be bystanders. Local courts, national courts, regional courts, and international courts must work with greater harmony. We must share evidence better. We must make sure that there's no hiding place. And if you look what Germany has done, it's been leading the way in terms of international prosecutions for Daesh crimes. We see what's happening in the Netherlands in terms of human trafficking that my office has also helped with. We have these green, sprouts that do give hope that there is going to be less tolerance for impunity and more determination to give rise to greater justice for people that need it desperately.
Great, thanks very much. We'll obviously come back to some of that later. Nadia Murad, I mean, you and your community have suffered in ways that few of us can imagine, but you've also shown leadership of an extraordinary kind. And I wonder if I can ask you what you think the lessons are of your experience, not as a survivor, but your lessons of your experience as a campaigner for accountability.
You know, the first thing that survivors, thousands of survivors from the Yazidi community who survived ISIS captivity, the first thing they ask, and they're still asking, is accountability. Thousands of survivors are yet waiting their day in court. We have made some progress, but it's very slow. We have seen here in Germany that 2 ISIS have been convicted for genocide and crimes against humanity. This is an important step forward, to hold more and more perpetrators accountable for crimes of genocide and sexual violence. This is what Germany did. They named the crime that it was genocide and sexual violence. Despite the mountain of evidence collected by UNITAD, they have identified more than 2,100 foreign terrorist fighters who have, direct tie to crimes committed in Sinjar, in Iraq and Syria. But unfortunately, so far, only Germany has, done the right thing. We need more and more countries to do the same thing. And this, the universal jurisdiction is an important tool to hold perpetrators for the most serious crimes. But how about thousands and thousands of ISIS who are right now in prison in Iraq and Syria? without any court, without any deep investigations. Survivors are still waiting. They have given their testimonies over and over again. They have not moved forward. Hundreds of Yazidis, hundreds of thousands of Yazidis are still displaced. They don't feel safe to go back because there has not been any justice. And justice is the key for survivors, for communities after atrocities to move forward. We have working with CREAM, we have working with our lawyer, Amal Clooney, with survivors, with the community. And survivors, these cases like the one in Germany, they need to be survivor-centric. We are seeing that Iraq is doing similar things, but there's no transparency. Survivors are included, community is not included. And the way that Iraq do it, it's different from Germany. They only charge them with terrorism, not sexual violence and genocide. But survivors want, they want the crime to be named as ISIS named it. Sexual violence was used as a weapon of war to destroy my community, to destroy women, to destroy Iraq, and to make sure that these communities will never go back, and to assure them that ISIS that will not succeed, we have to deliver justice and without any further delay.
Thank you so much. I mean, your answer has actually anticipated my second question, which was going to be, in your experience, what have you seen that shows the best support for victims? And in a way, you're saying that justice is actually the ultimate support for victims.
I lived in a displacement camp with hundreds of survivors, and survivors were ready to give their testimonies. And most of the times they will do it with hope to get some support, to get some justice. And they never knew what happened to their testimonies, to their stories. They were used once again by so many people in the camps. And for many of them, as I said before, the way to move forward is justice. And justice means so many things for survivors. The use of sexual violence is it's happening over and over again, and people have asked me in the past few months that I should talk to survivors in Ukraine, survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, to tell them that this is not their fault, and to not blame them. Well, I'm ready to do that, and I will always tell survivors that this is not their fault. But what I'm not ready to tell them is that I cannot promise them justice because nobody has promised me and my fellow Yazidi survivors justice. So this is something that we have been waiting for almost 9 years, and it is time to put an end to this, to make sure that sexual violence will not repeat over and over again.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. Prime Minister, it's said that there are 50,000 separate alleged war crimes being investigated in the Ukraine conflict at the moment. And I wonder, with your experience and what you've heard today, what do you think is the best way of trying to establish accountability for those crimes?
Well, we have to be very clear that there are war crimes that can be prosecuted by the ICC and Ukraine, but there is also a leadership crime, which is crime of aggression. This is leaders' crime to, make a decision to attack another country. And if there wouldn't be a leadership crime, then there wouldn't be any war crimes either. So this is very important that that we work on accountability also for the crime of aggression. And this is very important because otherwise the history repeats itself. I can bring this example. that whereas there was, after the Second World War, there was Nuremberg Tribunal, there was a Tokyo Tribunal, Nazi crimes were widely condemned in the whole world, and there were people committed for those crimes. But there was never a tribunal for Moscow, and that's why this keeps repeating itself all the time on Russia's side, because there is no accountability. And it is not only that we want to, cut this cycle, but it's also, as we heard, justice for the victims, that actually you can't do this. And if we have agreed in the international legal to attack another country, it's a crime of aggression. Then when you do and somebody does, then there can't be any immunity for the accountability, really.
Now, you used to be a lawyer in your former life, so just to make sure so that we're all on the same page on this, not everyone may understand or know the point that this fourth of the war crimes, the crime of aggression, can't be prosecuted by a country that's not a signatory. Just explain the point
yes,
that I just did, so that everyone is in the same place.
There is a Rome Statute that is Ukraine is not part of it, and Russia is also not part of it. So you can prosecute the war crimes, but you can't prosecute the crimes of aggression, and that means that leaders who are responsible for the crime of aggression, like Putin, like Lavrov, all the leaders there, they are not accountable for the leadership crime. And that's why there has to be a separate tribunal, separate court. And I see that, there are discussions to say that you can't do this and talk about this while the war is still going on. But actually, it is very important to get the message out there that you are going to get away with this, and it also might work with those leaders that maybe the people around them understand that you don't want to go there and you don't want to be responsible. So it is important to work on that. The ICC and that special tribunal can very well work together. Plus, the evidence can only be gathered while the crimes are being committed. So it is important to establish that while the war is going on.
Just let me ask you one more question before I come to Senator Graham, who was nodding at what you were saying. I listened to both Chancellor Scholz and President Macron, and they, in different ways, expressed concern that the war in Ukraine was somehow seen as a European or provincial problem, not as a global problem. And President Macron said how he felt there was no trust in what he called the global South in respect of the claims that were being made by Europeans. Can you speak to that? When you talk to global leaders, not just European leaders, are you finding that deficit of trust and engagement? And what do you think can be done about it?
When aggression pays off somewhere, it serves as an invitation to use it elsewhere. So the message that I give to those countries is that nobody can really, if we don't have accountability for those crimes, really, and then all the aggressors or would-be aggressors in the world are very carefully looking that nothing happens to you. You can only gain. And that is an issue for the world security, not only in Europe, but in the whole world.
Okay, thanks very much. Senator, I know that when people worry about whether or not American politics is too focused on America and doesn't look enough around the world, people point to you as someone who thinks globally, not just for your own state. I think it would be great for this audience to hear your priorities about this agenda of accountability and how you see this agenda.
Well, so there's good news, bad news, right? Here's the good news. We have enough members of Congress in Munich to have a session of Congress. So that's good news. Bad news for Putin, good news for Ukraine. Why are so many of us here? Joe Lieberman was one of the three amigos with Senator McCain and myself. I think all of us in America see this as a opportunity and a requirement for us to come here and tell our European allies in the entire world we're not going to forgive and forget when it comes to Putin's aggression. So this is a stunning political event in America. Senator McConnell, Senator Schumer are leading delegations. We have a bipartisan, bicameral representation in Munich that I think is a story unto itself. So Putin has given us a chance through his barbaric behavior to reset the world in a better way. And if we fail, God help us all. If you don't think this is global, then you're missing a lot. Don't you think if Putin goes down in flames, Taiwan is less likely to be invaded? So I just got back from Ukraine. The prosecutor general has 65,000 cases. There's been tremendous bipartisan support to change American law. We're not a member of the ICC. To allow this gentleman to come to the United States and receive evidence that we have to prosecute Russians in the Ukraine. I never thought that would be possible given our concern about the ICC. So Putin's done a lot of things that I couldn't do. NATO's going to be bigger and stronger. But if we fail, as we did with the Yazidis, then the likelihood of China going into Taiwan goes up. And everything we've talked about since the founding of the Munich conference becomes hollow. We're meeting in 2023. There's a war of aggression that needs to be prosecuted, I think, by an European tribunal. I'm an American, a bit leery of international organizations. I think a European tribunal to deal with crimes of aggression against Russia is a great idea. It doesn't take away from you, it adds. Here's the problem. We don't have the infrastructure we need to deal with the problem we're dealing with. The Yazidis were wiped out as a people, basically. And what is the forum? Syria is ungoverned. Iraq has limited capability. I've been arguing for almost a decade now. After 9/11, we should have come up with some international regime to prosecute transnational terrorists because they're a threat to all of us. We have Yazidi women and children being brutalized with really no effective form to deal with the volume of the problems. So let's rededicate ourselves to the ideas of the Munich conference. David, accountability is deterrence. Without accountability, there is no deterrence. So I think the U.S. Congress will be generous in funding prosecution efforts, helping you, the prosecutor general. If the Europeans want to create a tribunal to deal with crimes of aggression in Ukraine against Russia, count me in. I'm here to tell you the weapons will continue to flow from the United States. The economic assistance that Ukraine needs to stay in this fight will be there. I'm a Republican. I promise you there will be bipartisan resolve to keep the assistance going, and there's bipartisan resolve to hold Putin accountable. And if he gets away with this, if we forgive and forget, then you can expect more of this in the future. And I'll end with this. In 1994, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and how did it collapse? We all stayed together, and we stood up to the Soviet Union as a body, and it eventually fell of its own weight. Ukraine became a sovereign, independent nation. It had the third largest nuclear force on the planet, and they did an agreement called the Budapest Memorandum, where they would turn over their nuclear weapons to Russia with guarantees of sovereignty. This is the map that existed in 1994. In 1994, when they turned over their nuclear weapons, Crimea was considered part of Ukraine. Without accountability for this invasion, who in their right mind would do what Ukraine did in the future? There's so much at stake here. To this brave young woman, we have let you down. The world has not created a forum for justice. We need to. I will work with Mr. Khan to bring prosecutions to bear wherever we can, and to the Germans, thank you. But after what happened to your people, less than 10 people have been prosecuted, we can do better.
And I can't resist, since you've been very open you're welcome to applaud, all of you are welcome to applaud. You've been very open in your answer, Senator. Is there ever a world where the United States signs up to the ICC?
Not in the short term. The problem is we have cases pending against soldiers. And the ICC is designed to deal with events where there is no rule of law. Whether you like Israel or not, they have a legal system. We have a legal system. We prosecute our people when they violate the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But this moment is for the ICC. You've had 4 prosecutions. I am hopeful that you can help us hold Russia accountable, and for the Congress to allow you to come to the United States and receive evidence that we have in our possession is a major breakthrough. So the ICC is important, but it's not enough. Its jurisdiction doesn't cover crimes of aggression. So let's use this moment that Putin has given us to recommit ourselves to the values of Munich with infrastructure that can deliver. 20 years plus after 9/11, we really don't have a way to effectively prosecute international terrorists. A year after this war started, we're still struggling with the infrastructure to hold Putin and his cronies accountable. This time next year, I hope we can talk about what we did to rectify this problem.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take 4 people from the audience because I've been told that my place on the board is at stake if I don't get each of them to speak. So I've got a very strong performance bonus here. We're very lucky to have a second Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Lema Gbowee. I'd love you to speak, and then the Munich Young Leader. We also have the President of Latvia, who's here in the front row, and the Foreign Minister of Liechtenstein. I'll take those 4, then come back to this group. If they're really disciplined, we'll then come back to the audience. So.
Thank you, Mr. Miliband. I think I came with 2 cardinal sins, but I'll add a third one. There are 2 cardinal sins in the fight for accountability, justice, and to end lawlessness. I think the first one is during peace processes, how we suspend the entire conversation about justice in exchange for the promise of peace. That's the first one. The second one is the exclusion of women. The exclusion of women who suffer the most, who are more than 55% or 60% in different countries, the population of different countries, who suffer the brunt of the war in these peace processes, in transitional justice processes. And what we see is that the exclusion of these group of people at the beginning of every process is setting a new trend that they will be excluded and they will continue to suffer. The third cardinal sin is the double standards of justice in the international community. Senator Graham talked about prosecuting Russia and not giving Putin a day of impunity. But what about the US and ICC and all of the other issues that we need to talk about? So until we can address from local to national and global, we'll continue to see accountability as a problem. Justice will evade us, and our world will continue to suffer in a way that we're seeing in big and small ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll get a chance for the panel to respond to that. The Munich Young Leader, number 2, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm Mikhailo from Ukraine. I'm a lawyer and a think tanker, and I'm here with Munich Young Leaders, so thank you very much for this opportunity. My question is naturally about Russia. The Russian regime believes that their successful defiance of the international order will essentially put them above the international law and give them an opportunity to fit the world, to shape the world as it seems fit. Now, naturally, the way to counter it would be to empower, to reform the organizations that would build to specifically for the reason to solve these kind of issues, such as the OSCE and the UN. Unfortunately, we don't hear a lot of good news from there. So my question is, how do we ensure Russia's accountability if we cannot looks like we cannot find the courage to kick Russia out of the UN Security Council and the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to enable these organizations to do the job that they were set up for. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. President. If we can get the President the mic, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much, President of Latvia, Levits. So all the lawyers between us know the famous book of Ronald Dworkin, Taking Rights Seriously, this time. And I think this is the best here to take rights seriously, international rights in the context of international law. In an ideal world, International Criminal Court will deal also with the crime of aggression. The crime of aggression is the gravest international crime possible because the war crimes are following the crime of aggression. So, but there is, unfortunately, not international jurisdiction established till now. The best way would be to give tasks to the International Court, but to be realistic politically, it is not possible maybe in the next 10, 20, 30 years. Because you remember that 8 years it was necessary negotiations in order to complete the Rome Statute with paragraph 8A, crime of aggression. So, second best solution is to establish a special tribunal. It was done already in several cases. Each case has been different, but in each case, international community find a way to establish such a tribunal. And I think now is turn for such a tribunal to try the Russian aggression. It's possible by General Assembly. It's possible by other international organizations like European Union or Council of Europe. It's also possible by international agreement of like-minded states. I want only to remember that the Nuremberg Tribunal, it was absolutely innovation in international law, 1945-6 innovation, but it was created on the basis of an international agreement of only 4 states. Also, international law is flexible enough to establish such a tribunal. I will say best option would be through General Assembly, but we could not exclude others, so that we can say the rights are taken seriously. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then fourth and finally, the Foreign Minister of Liechtenstein. Is he or she here? Yes.
Thank you very much. Let me thank the organizers for placing accountability on the top of the agenda. As many of you know, my country, the Principality of Liechtenstein, has been at the forefront of discussions on international criminal justice for long years. We do strongly support the creation of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression along the lines described by Prime Minister Kallas. And yes, on the other side, we do believe that we have to expand ICC's jurisdiction over the crime of aggression in the future. Aggression is defined as a leadership crime. We also heard that from Prime Minister under international law. And the special tribunal, in our opinion, must therefore be given the power to overcome immunities for such individuals. In order to this happen, we do believe that we need to create an international tribunal negotiated upon the recommendation on the UN General Assembly. This is, in our opinion, the one way to ensure that the real perpetrators are held to account. And we will work with Estonia and a lot of other like-minded states and partners to make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go right along the line, starting with the Prime Minister, then the Chief Prosecutor.
Yes, first of all, I think it is an issue, international law issue, so it doesn't matter which region. And the question is, of course, that the UN was created after the Second World War, and it was created by Roosevelt, or his idea to have peace in the world. So it has worked, but not anymore. So we have to work on those rules, that it's very clear how we prosecute the crimes of aggression, because then it works as deterrence, really, for those crimes as well. So I think we need to rethink or think further with those rules that we already have in place. And it is true that it has to be much faster, all these prosecutions. It has to be, the war crimes have to be prosecuted fast, but also the crimes of aggression. For me, it is very important that no leader in the world can feel that they are immune to the system, because otherwise you have those thoughts. Of course, not a small country like Estonia, but bigger ones anywhere in the world, whichever region. And therefore, it has to be very clear. And I think, as Lindsey Graham was saying, the history has given us this opportunity to rethink those rules and to put together, clear rules, how we really, are holding accountable for those crimes, the leaders who are committing the leadership crimes.
Thanks so much. Chief Prosecutor.
Well, if I may, I gave a very brief earlier answer, so perhaps let me give a composite answer to the four interventions. I think it's fair to say everybody knows that it was in the dark days of this great country that the phrase "never again" took on universal significance. The epoch-making Nuremberg trial, of course, Tokyo, as you mentioned, gave rise to a period of inaction. And whilst we have seen real developments in terms of accountability in Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, and at the ICC, truth commissions in the Gambia, Hissan Habri tried in Africa, the truth of the matter, Nadia's book, The Last Girl, should shame all of us, because she is not the last girl. As we're speaking, different girls, different boys, women, children, men are shivering and shaking in refugee camps or in basements, scared of either machetes or bombs or missiles or drones. So the law we've got is not insignificant. Charles Taylor did not set foot in Sierra Leone, and he was tried, he was convicted in relation to the most serious cases, and he is in Durham serving a sentence. The same applies to Milosevic and Karadzic. So I think people should realize the law that the ICC has, that's my job. There can always be improvements to the law. But I'm keeping my eye on the tools we have at the moment. When I've been to Bucha and I've been to Borodyanka, I've been to Kharkiv, people want justice. They want justice in a court based upon evidence, not polemics. And our job is to deliver that, to take the law to the front lines. What we're seeing is an unprecedented galvanization. 43 states have referred the matter. 1/3 of all state parties have referred the matter to the International Criminal Court, the Ukraine matter to the court. We've joined a joint investigative team with Eurojust and European partners, and we're building cooperation with non-state parties and state parties alike. So we need to focus on what binds us together. And my own personal view, and remember, if you look just 1994, in the 100 days in Rwanda, when 700,000 people were killed, that was not a crime of aggression. That was a genocide. So lawyers like to talk about hierarchy of norms. I think all of the crimes are very serious. We need to use them so they're meaningful and they provide shelter to people that need the law.
Thanks. Senator, if you'll just excuse us for 30 seconds, just to let the Prime Minister, she just wants to make an additional point.
It is true what you say, justice for the victims and the prosecution of the war crimes. It is justice for the victims, but it is also what we want to achieve is that that history doesn't repeat itself. And that's why we need also the crime of aggression being prosecuted. So I don't think it's one versus the other, but it's actually supplemental to each other. One is for justice for the victims, and the other one is repeat those crimes.
If I may, just very briefly, because this is where the division of responsibility becomes manifest. I'm an officer of the court as a prosecutor, so I apply the law that I've got. As a legislature, you can either amend the Rome Statute or create others. But I don't think the necessary division here, but it's quite clear, using what we've got seems to be a no-brainer.
Yes. Thank you. Senator.
Well, let's see if we can tie all this together. And you make a great point. Boko Haram did horrible, terrible things. What's happened? Not much. So the infrastructure we need to deter these acts in the future doesn't exist. The infrastructure we need to hold people accountable for the things they've done doesn't exist in sufficient levels. Do we all agree with that? The ICC is part of the puzzle. So I want to increase your capability, but I would suggest that when it comes to violence against women, sexual violence, that we as a world come up with some protocols that would allow an international tribunal to prosecute the terrorist organization no matter where they're at on the planet. When they use the tool of sexual violence to advance their cause, there would be a forum to hold them accountable and to compensate victims. You have nation-state actors. You have the Wagner Group. We're going to make them a foreign terrorist organization under U.S. law. We also want to hold the Russian leadership accountable through crimes of aggression. We also want to hold Russian war criminals accountable in your court. So nation-state actors and international terrorist organizations require different infrastructure. So what I would hope to have happen in the coming days here is that the Congress will continue to support the ICC in a historic fashion, and that the Russians will see there is no forgiving and forgetting like with the Yazidis. That I want to make Russia state-sponsored terrorism under U.S. law, because that's a form of accountability that can be very, very devastating. There's many fronts to this war. There's the battlefield itself, there's the economic front, and there's the legal accountability judicial front. The best thing we can all do is not forgive and forget. Let the Russians know you will pay a price. We may not be able to extradite you anytime soon, but you will be held accountable if it's a trial in absentia. And one day, maybe the people of Russia will change course and send you. But to every group involved in the raping of women and children, there's got to be some system where you're held accountable, because nobody goes to jail. 20 years after 9/11, we're still struggling what to do with ISIS on a global basis. What's going on in Africa has pretty much been unaddressed. So Putin has given us an opportunity here by refocusing on Europe itself. Nobody 2 years ago probably dreamed that we'd have a land invasion changing the map of Europe by force of arms in 2023. So out of this horrible event, let's make something good happen. So here's what I would suggest, and I'll turn it over to you, that we create an international tribunal with the capability to prosecute crimes against women anywhere they occur, and define it in international law. That we increase the capability of the ICC, and we add an additional component for the crimes of aggression to make sure the Russian top tier will have a place that they can be held accountable. I've been coming here with John and Joe since the late 90s. Never have we had an opportunity to reset the world for the better than now. Out of this horrible event that Putin has created, we have a chance to do things we should have done years ago. And a word of warning, If he gets away with this, if Ukraine is required to give up an inch of their territory, then everything we've talked about here for years rings hollow, and I promise you the Chinese are watching.
Thanks, Senator. I think, Nadia, it's really appropriate that you get the last word.
Yeah, I think the global headlines today demonstrate that an effective international criminal court is more important than ever. However, for those of us who are victims or survivors of living in non-ICC member countries, we find ourselves beyond the court's reach.
Yes.
The international community's inability to hold perpetrators account for committing atrocities in Syria, Iraq, South Sudan, Yemen, and Myanmar sends, I think, a very clear message that, to the terrorist organizations and oppressive regimes in these countries, you can act with impunity. And I think most of us and now are worried that this, ISIS is not the last one. Boko Haram was the last one. What is happening in Russia is not the last one, because we know what we have done wrong in the past. So many people got impunity, and now we're worried about more atrocities, more people going with, impunity, because we simply have failed to
bilateral funding coming from any country, specifically the US, to the Sudan directly, because our government decided to host bin Laden in 1996. Well, now someone can ask, what is the problem? What is the issue that the Sudanese people actually make so they have to live in sanctions since 1996? As a grown person, I had my first Visa card 2 years ago, so I didn't actually know how to use Visa card. Until now, if you want to publish a scientific paper on anything, you have to publish it from outside. You cannot publish it from inside. Twitter, Coursera, many of the online platforms did not have Sudan as part of the countries that are eligible to access any of their services. Again, this is not very much related to food security, but it's related to why the infrastructure is not there for some of the countries and how we are as international community dealing with sanctions. Now, as we are speaking, no one will invest in Sudan if there is no access to the international finance. How can I send money to the country if I want to invest there? How can I take the money that I actually earned from my business out of the country to take it somewhere else? I mean, this is our questions that we should actually ask ourselves before. So now we are back into the same, this is a manner, the question of ethics. What is the problem or the wrong thing that the small-scale farmer in Russia did? He did not put the government policies for Putin policies, for example. And this is why I'm saying that the problems cannot be taken into silos. If we don't have a holistic access and we don't have the justice manner in our mind, then we are just talking and talking and talking. I have a small comment regarding how much mobilized money for humanitarian aid is there. It is a fact that it's easier to mobilize money where there's a famine. It's even harder, it's very harder to mobilize money when everything is okay, because they will say everything is okay, why you want to mobilize money? Yes, it is okay today, but it will not be okay tomorrow. So investing in the future and having this visionary in financing the humanitarian aid, but also in financing the multilateral bodies like the UN and other development banks and even the World Bank, etc., is the thing that we want to do.
Okay. So not just fighting emergencies, but making sure that there's development.
Can I
that's
just
sustainable.
briefly add something?
Jem has a quick comment
I
on
understand. I understand what you're saying, but remember when South Africa had the apartheid regime, we jointly agreed that we have to boycott this country, and there were some who unfortunately did not stick to that. But I belong to those who thought that it is necessary to boycott South Africa, and I know that there were probably great citizens who disagreed with the apartheid, but they had to pay the price for that. That sometimes happens if your country is a dictatorship. And one of the lessons learned from the unjustified war of Russia against Ukraine is that time should be over, where we as liberal democracies preach liberal democracy, human rights, rule of law, women's rights, and so on, and then we make those dirty deals with the dictators. That should be over, because it always comes back. We weaken those who fight for democracy, and we strengthen those who threat their own citizens, who let them starve, and at the end also threaten us. So I'm sorry, this is a very clear position vis-à-vis Russia. I supported him, and as long as Russia threatens Ukraine, we have to be very clear with our steps. And by the way, there are no sanctions vis-à-vis Russian grain.
So, quick response, Nasreen?
Yeah, just two
Sure.
things. Well, as a person who's coming from Sudan, I mean, I have very big questions on the enforcement mechanisms and how the multilateral community, I mean, our previous president was wanted by the International Criminal Court since nowhere, and he's still there. I mean, you can say this and a lot of people can clap for it, yet I know it's not practical. It doesn't happen. You want to change and you want to stop the war in Ukraine? Go and grab Putin.
Go and say again?
Go and grab Putin. Why are you making the people of the countries paying the prices for the dictatorship? You have relationships with them before, with these dictatorships. You can actually, the international community, I mean, this is a long discussion, but as we are talking here about the food security and just not to drift a lot further from there, it is very important to keep honest to ourselves, saying that we cannot talk about one problem and neglect the other problem. We cannot make everyone pay the prices of what a government can do, and we cannot also assume that everyone is okay with their governments and make them suffer. Thank you.
But I think it's also important to underscore that
The sanctions that you are describing are not on agriculture products. They're not on fertilizer. The government of Putin's government is suggesting that they are, and that's part of the propaganda.
And using
Because-
hunger as a tool.
But
That's
the
a clear
reality is the farmers that you are talking about are protected by the exemption in the sanctions.
Yeah, this is a new sanction, but I'm talking about the old.
No, we're talking, well, okay, I get the.
We should talk about the role
But
of
I'd
the
like
Wagner
to go-
troops in Africa, what they're doing there. We should talk
Need
about the
another
role of
session.
China.
We need another session. So I'd like to go to Earthrin and go back to the issue of whatever issue you want to talk about is running out of time. And then I want to give Niels an opportunity, and then basically we're done. So Earthrin.
I just want to answer the question that was asked regarding Earthrin, what is a World Bank 2.0? World Bank 2.0 needs to scrap the rules that are limiting today the World Bank's use of capital to support the financial crisis that's being felt by so many countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. You have 40 countries that are today in peril of fiscal crisis, and the World Bank has a AAA rating. And that's not why money should be put into the World Bank to protect their rating. It should be very much about how do we use that capital and their balance sheet to support the capital stacks that we were talking about earlier that will ensure the ability of private sector to invest, because you have first loss capital that is provided to get us past programs and corporate social responsibility, to leapfrogging the innovation that is necessary to build the institutions that are required to support an agriculture system that is much more resilient on the African continent and across the developing world.
Thanks, Earthrin. Yes.
Boris, thank you. I would love to jump into the debate.
nuclear alliance, but we don't need much conventional nuclear adaptation.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of the question. We don't need much.
We don't need much practical changement or modification on the ground. It's just we need to.
No, I think we just have to constantly demonstrate our readiness in the military point. I mean, whether it's conventional or nuclear, what Ukraine has exposed is the West's lack of readiness. Whether that is our stocks, our condition of our military, our ability to deploy whatever weapon systems has been tested, and we've been pretty much found wanting across the alliance, and that's why most countries in the alliance have increased their defense spending to meet that. And I think you have to demonstrate you have a credible nuclear deterrent to go alongside that. And 2 years ago in the integrated review in the United Kingdom, we declared an increase in our warhead numbers because it was important to make sure that our deterrent constantly remains credible. So I think it's about credibility, it's about readiness, and in the policy-making space, through bodies such as the P3 and NATO, be consistent and predictable. But in the actual capability, we need to be obviously always keeping the adversary guessing about to what extent we are capable in the day-to-day.
That was actually a wonderful bridge to the next question. If I take your last keywords, credibility, readiness, capability, that brings me to the US and China, actually. China is expanding its nuclear arsenal, and it actually seems to seek nuclear parity with the United States. How should Washington react? I mean, how should the US deter two near-peer countries?
Well, first, thank you for the panel and the opportunity to be with you. I agree with Ben that our role in Europe and as a member of NATO needs to continue to be having an effective deterrent nuclear umbrella. To your point, the world is changing rapidly. The PRC is significantly expanding its nuclear capabilities. But if I might, I'm just going to expand our aperture for a moment, because that's also, I think, the answer. The DPRK is also a significant nuclear threat regionally now and globally. Iran is ramping up its enrichment activities. The larger question I think we have to deal with, States and globally, is how do we return to a world where arms control is possible and where non-proliferation is on the table? If you think of the problems that can really only be dealt with climate change, global pandemics, nuclear proliferation, the United States and China must develop some relationship that allows for an arms control framework comparable to what we were able to develop with the Soviet Union decades ago. After the Second World War, there rapidly developed a bipolar world in terms of two countries that had massive nuclear arsenals, and then our critical allies, France and Germany. But over time, India obviously was added, Pakistan was added to the nuclear states. South Africa and Ukraine are two countries that gave up their nuclear weapons. We have to take into account the impact of Budapest, the Budapest Agreement of '94, and the fact that Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal and is today facing a brutal Russian invasion as we think about how to build a security architecture for this century. Both Chancellor Scholz and President Macron, in their comments just a few moments ago, said we have to take into account the global south, and deterring nuclear use, whether by China, Russia, or any other state, will also take into account the voices of those many, many countries around the world that do not want to see nuclear weapons ever used. They don't necessarily have a seat at the Security Council. They don't necessarily have a seat in the security architecture of the last 50 years as we imagine a new security architecture for climate, for pandemics, and for the nuclear threat. We have to include all the countries of the world, not just the handful that are currently nuclear armed.
Thank you. It was indeed, President Macron insisted very much on the nuclear dimension of the nuclear topic in his speech just this afternoon. That was remarkable. Itsumi, as High Representative for this armament, I might say your task has become more crucial and more difficult at the same time. So I was wondering, we have seen a real lack of cooperation between the nuclear weapon states of the NPT, and that undermines the sustainability of the nuclear order. In one of your speeches, you said, I quote, "the cracks in the facade of the nuclear non-proliferation regime." So how can we get nuclear weapon states to reinforce again the credibility of the NPT? Give us your three points or 5 points to-do list.
Well, thank you very much for this question. You know, I think we all agree that the actual risk of nuclear weapons use at the moment is too high. It's unacceptably high. So there is an urgent need for practical risk reduction measures, and I know that all P5 agree to that need. I mean, you look at this draft final document of the NPT final outcome document, which was never adopted because of consensus breaking by one state, but there is a whole package of very practical risk reduction measures to actually reduce the risk. You know, that includes, of course, de-escalation measures, restraint in rhetoric is another one, restraint in deployment of, advanced weapon systems that might be perceived as escalatory. Communications, all of those practical risk reduction measures are really key, and I would say really urgent. Now, building on that, I think they will have to be at some point, and I would hope that will be a very soon opportunity, they will have to be a return to some sort of a dialogue that will open the door to strategic stability rebuild. But from the United Nations point of view, this point I need to emphasize, to eliminate the risk of nuclear weapons use entirely, the only way actually is to eliminate the nuclear weapons itself. So keeping that joint objectives, which is a shared objective of the entire international community, it will be absolutely key. So, rebuilding the credibility of NPT, I believe that NPT still is a cornerstone for nuclear disarmament. But rebuilding the credibility at the universal level, I think nuclear weapon states have a responsibility to work on, first and foremost, risk reduction, and then return to a disarmament path and find a way to somehow tackle the fundamental needs. Transparency, I think, will be a key, both in numbers, but also in doctrine. So there are, a whole range of actually practical measures that you could still do, even though the international environment, the security environment is close to impossible, seemingly.
I think that's the key challenge, kind of seeing that the international environment is not permitting and carrying on. Turning to you now, what might sound like a simple question, and I hope you give us a more complicated answer. What is your vision for a revised nuclear order that can prevent arms races and further nuclear proliferation? That kind of follows on to the question we just discussed.
Yeah, the nuclear order as it stands now is supported mainly by the NPT system. And the NPT system has 3 pillars: disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And I think especially the first 2, disarmament, have been challenged in the last few years, or maybe in the last 2 decades. The agreement and the treaty-based disarmament regime between the former Soviet Union and Russia and the United States are, as Izumi has described, are full of cracks. The United States has been withdrawing from these agreements and treaties, the ABM, the INF, and also with other countries, the open skies. The only thing we have left is the New START treaty, and we have to keep it, but it's not certain that we can keep it. And the non-proliferation field, in the non-proliferation field, we have had very hard-earned Iranian nuclear deal, and it's at risk now. We have to do more to save it. I think at this this year's Munich Security Conference, I heard a lot of nuclear order, talking about nuclear order or nuclear orders. I think when we talk about nuclear order and when we characterizing nuclear world order, we should be very careful not to think that we are talking about democratic nuclear weapons versus autocratic nuclear weapons. We should be talking about nuclear weapons versus all of us, the whole humanity. It should be put in this way, and when building a new nuclear order, and that's the approach we should, I think we should adopt. Thank you.
Just as a reminder, if the New START treaty is not extended after 2026, there will be no limits on the size of the Russian and US nuclear arsenal. So that's the last man standing, I would say. Before I turn to the public, maybe just one impression that I get from the panel is that to a certain extent, we see this, I would still say nuclear order, kind of falling apart, turning into nuclear disorder, and we try to get our old tools and get it fixed, and it doesn't work. So I wonder to what extent we have a kind of misfit, trying desperately, not desperately, but trying with lots of courage to get our own tools to find back a stable nuclear order, and we realize it doesn't work. And with that Russian war, it works even less. This is what I meant in my introduction, saying that this war is closing 30 years of where we thought we could do security with fewer and fewer nuclear weapons, and it's not working. So let me turn to you. Before I take the first questions, I remind you, or all of us, of the Munich rule. Engage and interact with each other, don't lecture, and don't ignore one another. I will collect 3 comments and questions and back to the panel then. But before I do that, it's actually a particular honor for me to invite the 2023 Munich leaders young leaders to ask the first question. Katrin Deschauer is the deputy head of the division of the EU Common Security and Defense Policy of the German Federal Foreign Office, and she is a 2023 Munich young leader. And the first question is for you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, for this inspiring discussion. My question is relating to nuclear knowledge. The risk of Russia using a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine and the broader threat seems to be evaluated quite differently by citizens in different countries. And in my view, this also has to do with the level of nuclear knowledge or nuclear knowledge in general. What do you do in your respective countries and institutions to raise the so-called nuclear IQ? What would be your advice for countries where this is particularly difficult? Thank you so much.
Goes to the whole panel, or you have? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. And with that, I take 2 other questions before I turn back to you. So, anybody else? Jessica, please. And please identify yourself so people know who is talking.
Good afternoon. Oh, is it on? Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Jessica Cox. I'm the Director of Nuclear Policy at NATO. And I have probably, well, a question to all the panelists. You know, I think, Minister Wallace, you outlined a little bit of the security environment, the changes that we're facing. But I think the threats actually are even a bit more pronounced than what you stated. We're seeing a Russia that is clearly not at all afraid to use nuclear threats and coercion to achieve their objectives in Ukraine. In addition to their major nuclear weapons buildup that they've been undertaking over the last decade, we see a China that's also increasing its investments in its own nuclear capabilities, increasingly relying on nuclear weapons as part of its own defense strategies. North Korea has this year announced that it is going to become a normal nuclear state, whatever that means. And certainly prospects for Iran are not looking good. And India and Pakistan and the South Asia haven't even been discussed here yet, but there remains concerns there. So my question actually is looking at this landscape and the fact that in the West, our nuclear posture and doctrines and strategies have largely remained static over the last decade. Are we doing enough deterrence in light of all of these challenges? Also with the kind of erosion of the arms control and disarmament regime and the fact that Russia and China clearly don't want to come to the table and talk to us right now about arms control and transparency. Are we doing enough deterrence? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katarzyna Pisarska. I'm the chair of the Warsaw Security Forum. My question to the panel is, what if deterrence fails? And what if Putin actually uses nuclear weapons in whatever way in Ukraine? What will be our first, second, third reaction concretely if he's listening to this panel now and his advisors are? What are we going to do about it?
So we have some more pessimistic question. What do you do to raise the nuclear IQ? Jessica told us it's even worse than we discussed on the panel. And if I might add something, after this war, Russia will be conventionally weakened. So it's very likely to focus even more on its nuclear dimension. So what is our reaction to that one, adding to your very negative list already, Jessica? And the last one, what will we do if deterrence fails? Who wants to start? Otherwise, I will volunteer you, Ben.
Oh, well, okay. Well, funnily enough, all three questions are linked, and it starts with nuclear IQ. And I sort of said at the beginning of this, I'm a child of the 80s, where the debate was very live in all our countries, ranging from protests to different major political parties taking different positions, which has all been forgotten. So I think the answer is we're not doing enough on nuclear IQ. We need to bring our populations with us. We need to explain why we have these capabilities, and we need potentially to explain why we think a deterrent works. First of all, at a national level, and then by demonstration through strong, coordinated statements through things like and NATO to say that alliances backed up by our nuclear deterrence and our values are effectively the setting for why we need them, but also how we defend or deter. And then the last question, yes, Russia is probably watching, and they would love to know what we would do if they were to use a tactical nuclear weapon, which is exactly why we're not going to say. The simple reality is, as we've said collectively, that the use of a tactical, I mean, it's a bizarre concept in the first place, but the use of a nuclear weapon anywhere would be totally unacceptable and would elicit a response. And that would be a very severe response to Russia. But we're not going to, or whoever uses it, we're not going to spell out how and what and exactly that would be. And I think that is the right thing, because I think ambiguity plays a role in deterrence, and that is very, very important. Russia knows our position as far as that goes. I think it knows India's and China's position, who I think were pretty straight about, in public, about their view of the use of a nuclear weapon in Ukraine or otherwise. And I think that is the best you're going to get out of me of what would we do. But be under no illusion, returning or maintaining the nuclear taboo on use post-1945 is absolutely paramount. That message is very clear. You can't sort of use it a bit and then expect the world go back to normal. And therefore, it is in the interests of the P3 and other nations to return back to the nuclear taboo status. And I know that from a Chinese contributor just now, who also recognise the importance of being a responsible nuclear power. The word responsible is very, very important in that. And I think, I can't question the motives behind China and India's messaging to Russia, but being a responsible nuclear power is very important to a large superpower and countries who seek to lead. And I think that is as important as the other type of messaging. And I think that's why people like us would do everything we can to make sure that nuclear taboo is not allowed to be diluted, and we would have to return to a situation unacceptability of use is demonstrated.
Thank you. That was very clear.
I've never been asked about the nuclear IQ of my constituents. You focused us on an important threshold question. When I was a college student, there were widespread protests in the United States, debates and discussions about intermediate nuclear forces, about a nuclear freeze, about different proposals for different arms control regimes. It was part of common discussion, particularly amongst the politically active. That has largely, as you just heard, I agree, dropped away. And yet I think the level of concern or anxiety by the average person around the world about the use of nuclear weapons has gone up. Because the unimaginable, a global pandemic that kills millions, climate change, reshaping our world, is happening. And to put on the menu of things about which all of us should be more aware and more engaged, the very real threat of the misuse or first use of nuclear weapons. Are we doing enough? I would argue no. We are doing much more than is publicly known to assemble a coherent, immediate, prompt, forceful NATO response and global response should Putin cross that, God willing, uncrossable line. And I'll agree with Ben that the contribution being made by China and India in repeatedly publicly calling out Putin and saying you should not be threatening the use of nuclear weapons, whether tactical or strategic, is an important contribution. But frankly, that line, that moment once crossed, takes us into a world dramatically more dangerous, even than the one we're currently in. So this deserves, and in my view is getting, focus, attention, resources, and priority. Our challenge is that we don't know what is deterrable. But I'll remind you, part of the deterrence is not a direct counter threat from NATO or the United States or other countries. It is engaging the rest of the world. A country like South Africa that gave up its nuclear weapons has also, I believe, conveyed clearly to Putin and the world that they would oppose fiercely any use of nuclear weapons. So too, I believe, has Brazil. Rebuilding this global consensus around nuclear threats is going to take years. It's taken us years to get here. Putin's aggression really began clearly in 2008. And then in 2014, in a whole series of steps that did not get the forceful, unanimous global response they deserved. That's how we're at this dangerous moment. We're going to need to continue to rebuild a global architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. These are really spot-on questions. Nuclear IQ, absolutely. I think it has become everyone's priority task to really educate, increase the knowledge base, especially amongst the young population. In the UN, engaging with the youth population, providing education and also networking opportunities, especially on nuclear disarmament issues, have actually become a top priority. Some of the governments are now prioritizing this, including the Japanese government, that will allocate a lot of money to create young leadership communities focusing on nuclear disarmament issues. So that's number one, top priority. I would say that it is also a necessity as well, because the traditional ideas for nuclear weapons, we need to actually take into account some of the challenges. For example, that what will be the nexus between nuclear weapons and new and emerging technologies and new domains, cyber, outer space, artificial intelligence. Those are the areas where we need to bring in young people with a nuclear IQ, high IQ, to actually think and then think about how to actually move towards a more secure approaches. This leads me also to a very important question. When we talk about nuclear order, what we want to say is that I think there is a need for a new vision in general for arms control and disarmament. And it's not only because of the new technologies and new domains, but also because of a much more, complicated world, bipolar to multipolar, much more regional specific nuclear tones. And that has to be actually looked at within that regional context. In other words, really have to be combined with some of the political solutions to the regional tensions and conflicts. And let's not forget that we need to address all of the related weapon systems, delivery systems. They are, again, new introductions of conventional weapon systems with strategic impact. So all of those things actually do require that there has to be a new vision for arms control and eventually disarmament. And here, what I want to emphasize is that disarmament, arms control is not some sort of a utopian idea. They are security instruments. The countries worked throughout the previous Cold War on those issues. NATO was really involved in arms control discussions, disarmament discussions, thinking about those, because those are security instruments. So let's make sure that we understand that those are security instruments, and then make sure that we will return to actually engaging in thinking about those things. I think there is a consensus on absolutely preventing nuclear use. Once nuclear threshold is crossed, even if it is a tactical nuclear weapons or so-called low-yield nuclear weapons, I think there is a risk of that actually not stopping at one use, but actually going to escalate. So for us, it's absolutely something that we have to make sure it will not happen.
Thank you. I actually agree with most of the things by the previous speakers about nuclear IQ. And in China, I think the feeling for nuclear weapons are more or less somewhat philosophical. And because China's no first use policy starting from 1946, it has been there 6-9 years, and the logic are very simple and straightforward. Nuclear weapons are bad. It kills people. It destroys property and even civilization. Because it's so bad, it's so terrible, we should not use it. We should make it useless. So for China, we have the no first use policy, and it has been, I think, intertwined into the Chinese culture. Nuclear weapons are bad things. And I agree with Ichumi on the point that we have to have some new ideas about the emerging technologies when coupled with nuclear weapons. Especially in NC3, the nuclear command control communication systems. And for the question on Russia, I just want to respond to blame that China is in its nuclear arsenal, and also the nuclear weapons role in national security is not true. China's nuclear policy stays no first use. And to the last question, is a hypothetical question. What if Russia does use nuclear weapons? It's hypothetical and it's hard to answer. And I also agree some ambiguity deters, plays the role of deterrence. I just want to mention that the statement, joint statement, released last year that nuclear war cannot be won and therefore should never be fought, had been repeatedly mentioned by world leaders, including Chinese President Xi Jinping in his meeting with President Putin, with Chancellor Scholz, and with President Biden, and it worked. And personally, I don't think that any military benefit on the battlefield of using nuclear weapons can exceed the cost of breaking 80 years nuclear taboo. Breaking that taboo carries with it enormous cost.
Thank you. I'm really grateful for this underlining. You all did it actually, that breaking the nuclear taboo, we would wake up in a totally different world. So that would fundamentally change the world we are living in. And I'm also grateful for Isumi, for you, that you brought up the new technologies. Because when we talk about rising the nuclear IQ, it sometimes, for me, it sounds like we raise a nuclear IQ and then here we are. But that's, for me, it's getting it wrong, because we don't only need to raise the nuclear IQ, we actually need to adapt to the new challenges, new technologies from artificial intelligence to big data, plus a new international setting. So I think raising the nuclear IQ would be nice, but it's not sufficient. I take two last questions because I was told we really have to stay on time and I want to do a last round. I have Natalie on my list. And second question behind there. Natalie. Maybe you try to speak up, yeah. Oh, the mic is coming.
Thank you. Natalie Tocci. So question for all panelists. So a lot of thought and quite a bit of action has been put into how should we ensure that the nuclear threat, meaning Putin using a nuclear weapon, is deterred. And part of that answer has to do with, well, we have to be careful not to provoke and the risk of escalation and how to do that. I was wondering if the panel could comment on the nuclear risk inherent in that response, meaning what is the messaging sent to all other countries, not Russia, in terms of, hey, you can lose a conventional war, no worries. But if you've got nuclear weapons, everyone is going to be hyper careful, rightly so. So how to mitigate that nuclear risk inherent in our nuclear deterrence response to Putin's nuclear threat?
Can I call it the other nuclear risk, Natalie? And I take the second question.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Masa Ota. I'm a Japanese journalist with Kyoto News. We have seen another nuclear ramification since the war has started in Ukraine. Japanese politicians started about the nuclear sharing option. Some conservative circles start the debate about the maybe we may take this option in the future, but also a South Korean public, majority of the people now support the indigenous nuclear weapons or redeployment of the nuclear force into the region. So we have seen a huge ramification in the region, but as Ms. Nakamitsu said, the arms control is an important security instrument, but in the region, especially East Asia, two nuclear states, but there are no arms control framework and there are no security, mechanism. So what should be a first step in order to alleviate the future nuclear tension in the region? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will start in the reverse order, and you pick and choose, and try to stay very, very, very brief, so I can ask my last question.
Me?
Yes, please.
The nuclear risk, I sometimes wonder that maybe you have mistaken deterrence for coercion. And how do you distinguish deterrence and coercion? I would ask you to think about it. And the question of first step, I don't think the Japanese government, not in the near future, would really call for nuclear sharing. And I think that the joint effort should be focused on denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and it has to do with the extended deterrence that the United States provided to Japan as well as to ROK.
Thank you.
Yes, I think these two questions actually are related to increased proliferation drivers that Ukrainian war has brought. I think from the United Nations side, we have been saying that, sometimes inaccurate narrative that if Ukraine kept its nuclear arsenals, the whole thing would not have happened, is a dangerous narrative, and we want to counter that. Now, coming to, again, NPT, what we often say is that non-proliferation, which I think is in everyone's interest. The more nuclear weapon states are, the more risks of nuclear weapons be. So non-proliferation is a common interest for all, but that is only one side of the same coin together with disarmament. So I think the narrative has to shift. And that's why in the beginning I said that if you really want to eliminate the nuclear risk entirely, the only way to achieve it is to eliminate nuclear weapons themselves. Now, we know that it's not going to happen overnight, but we need to make sure that the world community will return to that path. And there are many steps that we will have to go through. We know it will be difficult, but for the common interest for security, I think we all have to share that perspectives.
Thank you.
Natalie, I think you asked an important and pointed question. If Putin is successful, if in the end he grinds to a success from his perspective, comparable as to what's happened in Syria or in Chechnya, and his nuclear saber rattling is a part of that, has really deterred the West from being more aggressive in delivering advanced weapon systems, then we've encouraged any nuclear state in the future to similarly threaten as a way to slow roll conventional conflict into a battlefield success. So to me, that's part of the argument as to why it's critical that Putin not win and that Ukraine be victorious. I also briefly want to pick up on the point you made earlier. We have rapidly changing technologies in deep fakes, in drones, in artificial intelligence that will make new delivery systems of more lethal weapons, including nuclear weapons, possible, and will make attribution of who launched them or delivered them more difficult. We are at a critical moment, and we have to rebuild global engagement into a global consensus around the importance of nuclear non-proliferation.
Thank you. I mean, I just take on that. Part of being a responsible nuclear power and indeed creating a sort of layer of activity that works towards a deterrent is predictability. And as you say, I think one of the biggest threats to sort of insecurity or to security is that obfuscation or that some states could think they could deliver a nuclear